IB Nation, welcome to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. We are live here on a Monday, which means that we are back for Notre Dame Recruiting Hour. Busy weekend as we dive into the latest in Notre Dame recruiting. This is one that I'm super excited about, folks, because obviously not only is the team having extraordinary success, Notre Dame coming off of a 56-3 victory over Tennessee State this past weekend. They'll also be taking on the NC State Wolfpack next Saturday, which of course will be their first true home game. I'm not sure if I'm counting Dublin just because it was a neutral site technically, right? A true away game for their game against NC State and the best opponent that they've played so far. Obviously defeating Navy 42-3 in the first week, 56-3 over Tennessee State. I'm live here and doing a solo show. So if anybody has any questions, please, we will have a mailbag at the end. So put an MB in the chat, and I will be able to distinguish what is a super chat and what is a question and what is not, what is just general conversation that's happening within the chat. So welcome back, folks. It's been a wild weekend, not only from the simple fact that we got Notre Dame football this weekend. I also got away for a couple of days, went out to the Grand Canyon of Pennsylvania. So I literally just got back home about 35 minutes ago. So we don't sleep here at Irish Breakdown. I got home, got back in my car, drove over to my sister and brother-in-law's house, and we are here to do a live show. And fun conversation. So we're going to, this actually is this might be a little bit of a longer show for you all before you start, like, share, subscribe, all that great stuff. This might be a little bit of a longer show because one, Notre Dame had its first home game this past week against Tennessee State, which means that there were Notre Dame recruits that were on campus. I want to get into an interesting official visitor during that segment. I want to get into a player that was just offered this past week by Notre Dame and made a quick turnaround visit to check out Notre Dame for the Tennessee State game. Second segment, I'll be breaking down some of the best performances from this past week. I put on a little bit of the commit recap this morning. Some of these players that and talking about 2024 recruits mostly, some of the players that I honestly had a little bit of concern about coming into the season as far as how they would look on the field, because they were a little bit of what we would call developmental recruits, have really kind of changed the narrative. I mean, I'm talking about guys like Bryce Young, defensive end out of the state of North Carolina, talking about guys like Tabron Benny Powell out of the state of Ohio. There's a lot of players I think are taking a huge step forward on top of the just absolute studs that Notre Dame has in the 2024 class. So we're going to get into every commit, really break it down. I have kind of some leading questions that I really want to hit into, guys, because I think the biggest thing that you all are looking for here is not just the numbers, right? Like, you can go read my article at irishbreakdown.com. You can see how many yards CJ Carr threw for this past week in their victory. You can see Cam Williams doing Cam Williams things. You can read stat lines from Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams scoring 4 touchdowns. Like, you could do all that stuff, right? But for me, it was about leading questions of, why does this matter? What players are taking a massive step forward? And who are some players that are maybe surprising? That's what I'm looking for, surprises coming into the season. So we're going to hit on a lot of the great We're going to hit on a lot of the great performances from this past week. I also have an extra interview for you all. This one was one that I actually recorded like over a month ago, but we haven't had kind of the time because we've had a lot of things working, obviously, with the season starting, recruiting, 2024 class kind of solidifying itself. But I have an interview with Sonia Young, who is the mother of Kedron Young, star running back in the 2024 class, that I'll also hit on today, out of Lufkin, Texas, one of the more talented running backs in the 2024 class, committed to Notre Dame. So have another parent interview for you all that we're going to hit into. And of course, as I already mentioned, we're going to do a mailbag at the end. So throw mailbag questions into the chat at any time. I'll be starting questions throughout this podcast. I will be doing the mailbag as long as you guys keep throwing in questions there, right? Super chats are also very much appreciated. Keep your boy employed, but we will answer all the mailbag questions that are kind of thrown into the chat. Let's start us now with the Tennessee State performance. And I already see people buzzing about it, right? Notre Dame, obviously. I thought they came out a little bit slow. I wasn't on the post-game show this past weekend. And actually, that reminds me. I wanted to do this because you all know how I am, right? Just got off of a couple of days, a couple of days of rest and relaxation with the family, ADHD already kicking in. I want to put something up here before I completely forget, because Katie Keevers had a great question before the show where she had just asked, was there an upon further review? And for people that don't follow this chat religiously or don't watch many of the shows, upon further review is always a segment that Brian Driscoll and Vince D'Addario do on Sunday nights after their initial impulse, opinions of the game on Saturday. We go back, watch the old 22, watch the broadcast, do our due diligence, look at the stats, look at what was good, what was bad, what was indifferent. And then they come to kind of more of a absolute understanding of the football game on Sunday nights. They were not able to do it Sunday night, so that show will be tonight, Monday. And you all know that if you hit that notification bell at the bottom of this video. So upon further review will be tonight. Katie, I know you asked that earlier. I think someone had even answered it for you, but I just wanted people to, if anybody was wondering, was there an upon further review last night? There was not. It got delayed Monday night. They will be doing that tonight, Brian Driscoll and Vince D'Addario. So make sure that you're subscribed to the channel for some good content there on a Monday night. So I want to get in, obviously, folks, and we're really going to hit on a few of the important things to take away from this past weekend. And I already have questions about LSU having, a kind of a mixed review this past, last night, which was fun, guys. I mean, I'll be very honest. You all know that I'm a little bit of a petty guy at times, right? Especially when it comes to Brian Kelly and LSU. So we could talk about LSU during the mailbag. We could do that. We can talk about the Brian Kelly performance. But I really want to focus, obviously, on the positives of the Notre Dame program in this first segment. We had, during a 56-3 victory, I thought it was a little bit of a slow start for Notre Dame. I think most of you all probably felt the same way. First quarter was... Offense was struggling to get the running game going a little bit in the first quarter. Everything was a little bit difficult for Notre Dame in the first quarter. I think that also, give Tennessee State some credit. Tennessee State came out, and I thought they played a really good, hard-fought first quarter. They were forcing pressure. They were trying to really play behind the line of scrimmage against Notre Dame, and offensively, they made a couple plays, and they kind of prolonged it. It was 7-3, should have been 7-6. Obviously, they missed the field goal, but eventually Notre Dame gets into a groove, especially in that second quarter, and they're on, and they end up dominating that football game. So it was nice to see Notre Dame, especially after a little bit of a slow start, really get into a solid groove there, which I thought was really good. Now, of course, I'm the recruiting guy, so I want to talk about the impact that this had on recruits that were on campus. And to be very honest with you all, right? Notre Dame versus Tennessee State, it is not the game where Notre Dame as a staff is going to push for a ton of big-time recruits to come to. We know that that's going to be Ohio State this season in a few weeks. We know that it's going to be USC this season when they come to town. Those are more of the big games that Notre Dame is going to want to get big-time recruits on campus. But, of course, that doesn't stop Notre Dame from doing their work on the recruiting side of things. And we had a couple very interesting visitors this past week. I know I put out on Friday kind of the final count, and there was a lot of 2025 recruits who had not been offered by Notre Dame yet. There was also Austin Alexander, who's a defensive end out of Kentucky, that has actually been on campus in Notre Dame before, but he had just received an offer this past weekend. We also had a bunch of commits that were on campus for Notre Dame in the 2024 class, and Justin Thurman in the 2025 class, as well as Logan Saldate, who is a wide receiver out of Palma High School in Salinas, California, 2024 class. Fun story here, and I want to start with Logan because I've had a chance to touch base with him a lot. I'll have a deeper update on this, as I kind of gather a little bit more information, but I've had plenty of intel on this one. So Logan Saldate, several weeks ago, was committed to Oregon State before the season had started. Really talented wide receiver in the 2024 class. Notre Dame, after Isaiah Canyon had decommitted and then next step committed to Georgia Tech, Notre Dame was kind of figuring out who were the players that Notre Dame wanted to be the third wide receiver in the class, right? Everybody, of course, wants to hyper-focus on the big-time names, and I completely get it. And we could talk about that at some point, right? The Ryan Wingos of the world and some other big-time players. Jeremiah McClellan, I know, was a player that someone had asked about a few weeks ago, and even before the Logan Saldate commitment. But Notre Dame had done their due diligence. They had basically been doing all their homework on a bunch of different players in the 2024 class. And Logan Saldate was one that kind of stood out to them. They had been doing their homework on him for a while, but they had Logan send him a videotape of him running routes, verifying his 40, because they really liked this film. They just wanted to, of course, get the verified information that they want as far as the speed and what they're seeing fully on film, making sure that it translates to the next level. So Logan Saldate had actually committed to Notre Dame and flipped his commitment from Oregon State to Notre Dame without ever visiting campus before. That does not happen very often. That rarely ever happens in the recruiting side of things. So Logan Saldate wanted to get to campus as quick as possible. So the Tennessee State game was the first home game of the season. He made it a priority that he wanted to get to campus. So Logan takes an official visit, the only official visitor. And again, you don't usually get official visitors for a Tennessee State football game as far as Notre Dame playing an FCS opponent, but he wanted to get to campus. His parents were both able to get to him. And also Logan's older brother is a wrestler for Michigan State program. So he had come down with them as well for the weekend. And his sister, his oldest sister, actually went to Michigan State as well in the past, but she has graduated now. But they got the parents, Logan, and then his older brother coming down to spend the weekend together during the Tennessee State game. And I talked to not only Logan about just kind of, how he fit in, but I've also talked to a couple other Notre Dame commits about how he fit in. And it was funny. I was talking to Carson Hobbs, and Carson, direct quote from him, he's like, Logan is like another version of myself. And he means that obviously with his playful manner, his humor, like that type of bag, right? So Logan, I'm told, and he kind of verified this, fit in tremendously. Spent a lot of time with Cam Williams, spent a lot of time with Carson Hobbs. They were two of like the more obviously outspoken and energetic personalities that were on campus for Notre Dame this weekend. So I really think that this was honestly, even though we're going to shake our head and be like, oh, a big official visitor for Notre Dame and Tennessee State, this was a massive one because Logan Saldate had never been to campus. So there needs to be I think there needed to be a moment of just clarity this past weekend, right? Of I made the right decision here. I made a decision based upon a gut feeling and a feeling that I wanted to take that next step, right? And to be a part of the Notre Dame program, but he had never visited Notre Dame before, never visited South Bend. So I think that this was a tremendous opportunity to just gain that clarity and really become fundamentally sound in his decision. I really think that that's what this weekend was. So for me, Notre Dame did that for Logan. If there were any, and I don't think there was, but if there was any pause after the decision of man, I made a big decision without actually being on campus and feeling it out, I think that those answers were very much made. So Logan has a tremendous weekend, really hit it off with the other commits on campus. I think was described as kind of an energetic, hyper personality, and I think he's really, really going to fit in with the 2024 class for Notre Dame. So I think that was a great step for Logan. And for people that haven't followed along with Logan Saldate through the first two games, because we'll hit on that during the second segment of the show. But Logan is off to a very fast start for Palma High School. He's now up to a 4-star recruit according to Rivals. I think Notre Dame got an absolute steal here, guys. I really do. I think that if Notre Dame had not made the move when they did, you would have seen Logan committed to Oregon State entering this season, and people, as they get eyes more on the senior film, would have been just berating him, trying to get him to flip. West Coast, right? He's a California kid. I would have been shocked if USC and some of those West Coast schools would have just, made huge pushes for a guy like Logan Saldate. So I really think that Notre Dame did a tremendous job here, not only this weekend, but they made a really good evaluation early on. They had seen what he looked like, what he was trending to, how he had been developing this offseason, and they pushed for Logan Saldate. So I think they did a tremendous job and really just reaffirmed his decision to come to the University of Notre Dame. So tremendous start to the weekend. Official visitor, Logan Saldate. The other big visit that I wanted to talk about, because again, there were a lot of really interesting football players that had made the trip this weekend. I think of like Grant Bierman, that is out of Lakota West, which is, of course, the high school of Ben Minnick in the 2024 class that committed to Notre Dame, and then Tabron Benny Powell, I'm sorry, in the 2023 class, Tabron Benny Powell in the 2024 class. They had their eyes on Grant Bierman, who's a really talented linebacker out of Lakota West as well, 2025 kid. I would just keep close eyes on him. That's all. Again, I'm not predicting an offer is extended. I'm not predicting that he's going to be a kid that's an immediate take. Like, I don't know if that's the trend that you're going to see with like a Grant Bierman, for instance, but there were guys like him that were on campus that interesting, right? Cal Thrush, another interesting player. Ojada, who I'm not going to mispronounce his first name because that would be incredibly disrespectful, and I don't want to do that. There were some 2025 kids that, although they do not have offers from Notre Dame yet, are very interesting. A lot of local kids, obviously, for this first game, but I really thought that Notre Dame had they brought together a very interesting kind of demographic of recruits as far as 2025 kids that don't have offers, 2025 kid that had just gotten an offer, an official visitor. It was just a very interesting weekend. So Austin Alexander, who again is a defensive end out of the state of Kentucky in the 2025 class, 6'3", 240 pounds listed. He was just offered on Wednesday by Notre Dame. Coming off of a really nice season as a sophomore, had 84 total tackles, 11 sacks, and he's been off to a fast start this season so far. So this was a very interesting one because Austin Alexander, one, had been on campus before. He was on campus right around a year ago, a little less than a year ago. He had visited Notre Dame last year for the Cal game. So he came for the Cal game. At that point, was a kid that didn't have an offer. And I talked to Austin after he had gotten his offer on Wednesday, and then also, obviously, for my recruit, I had a visit recap that was on irishbreakdown.com. You should go take a look at that if you haven't already. And he talked a lot about that he had not heard from Notre Dame for almost a year, pretty much since that visit. He had not heard from them at all. And then all of a sudden, they get back in touch with him very recently, just this past week. They get him to come to campus very quickly here. And it's fascinating because he openly talked about how the Notre Dame staff had basically told him, like, we apologize for not being in touch over the last X amount of months. Like, you're a guy that we want to recruit heavily moving forward. We would love you to be a part of the 2025 class. He had a quote that was like almost directly about that. Come be part of the movement with the Irish or something like that. So a young man that I think Notre Dame was doing their due diligence on as a sophomore. They liked him, but it wasn't to the point of let's offer him and let's really heavily recruit him. Obviously, this offseason combined with what he's done early on in the year, because the one thing about Austin Alexander, which is interesting, is last year, Austin was about a 6'4", 215 pound, 6'3", 215 pound defensive end. So he was a really skinny kid. This offseason now, he is up to 240 pounds. So his body is really developing. They've been taking a much deeper look at him. And they like what they see, obviously. Right? So they get him on campus. He talked a whole lot about, obviously, Notre Dame's pitch, the openness. And I really want to applaud Notre Dame for that, because this happens a lot, guys, where a school, and I'm not talking about Notre Dame, but a school will bring in a player where they're looking at him, but maybe they're not ready to push or offer him. So they don't really take a step to, make that relationship grow, because you have to be very strategic about these things sometimes, right? Like if you push for a kid, if you make it seem like you're pushing for a kid and then he gets that impression and then he wants to commit on the spot, then that relationship is just fractured, because you have to, obviously break that news of like, hey man, like we're not going to take that commitment as of today. This isn't a decision that we're ready to make as of right now. But clearly he has developed, and they really love the player that Austin Alexander is now. They liked who he was, but now they view him as a much higher level prospect to recruit. So they got him on campus, and it went great. I mean, my headline for my visit recap with him was basically that they made up for lost time. So I really think that they had kind of pushed the right points with Austin Alexander. Again, he's a really talented kid, very productive. He's now viewed as a top 200 player in the 2025 class by at least one recruiting platform. And he's also the nephew of Sean Alexander, who was a great running back who obviously played for the Seattle Seahawks. I think he played for the then Washington Redskins for a little bit of time. But for people that remember Sean Alexander, he was one of the best running backs in probably a 6 to 7 year stretch. Like the dude was fantastic for the Seattle Seahawks. So they are related. He is the nephew of Sean Alexander and a player that I think you should just keep your eyes on moving forward. It's a very deep and talented defensive end group in 2025. But I do have some questions as of today as far as who Notre Dame is 100% going to push for. Like, I think they're going to push for Christopher Burgess and a couple other players on the board. But finding a player that's more of kind of that Viper type, I have my questions of who that guy is going to be in the 2025 class as of today. So seeing them take the step with Austin Alexander this weekend, I think that, again, this could end up being a really good early evaluation because there are now schools that are really pursuing Austin. Like at one point, I think most people thought he was just going to be a Kentucky guy. I mean, I'm pretty sure like 247 Sports even has like a warm meter on Kentucky, but he's now, his offer list is expanding quickly. He's getting a lot more looks. So I think that he's going to be a player that a lot of schools are going to take much deeper looks at, and Notre Dame is very much included in that. So he was the other big visitor this weekend. Offered on Wednesday, visits on Saturday. It's a very good sign. And this isn't a look, like there's some people that are like, oh, is he a silent commit because it happened that quickly? I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to be completely honest with y'all, he's not a silent commit to the University of Notre Dame. Notre Dame has just jump-started that relationship, and that's going to build from here. So we'll see how things extend and continue with Austin Alexander out of the state of Kentucky, 2025 class. Talented pass rusher, but obviously a very good initial step with him. And it's great that he's been on campus twice. He had a really nice visit. And I think more than anything, though, I applaud Notre Dame for this. And I'll say it again, the openness to him of why the relationship had stopped and needed to take a next step forward to really be a guy that they push for. I think that openness really matters. There's a lot of people that would have just cut ties, and then once they really, broke out, then you're going to come back into the fold. But I think Notre Dame did a really good job by being honest with him, being open with him. So I think that Notre Dame took a great step here with Austin Alexander, defensive end, 2025 out of the state of Kentucky. Outside of that, there aren't a lot of players that are like massive updates that were this weekend from the recruiting side of things. I mean, Jerome Bettis Jr. was on campus. That's just one that we're just going to feel good about for, kind of moving forward here. But then you had a lot of commits on campus, obviously. I mean, guys like Bronte Johnson were on campus. I mentioned Carson Hobbs, Styles Prescott was on campus, Cam Williams. There were a lot of really talented players, Justin Thurman in the 2025 class as well. So that's a little bit of just kind of the update on the visitors from this past weekend. I'm going to get into a little bit of a recap of what the commits were able to do on the high school football field next. So hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast. 5-star reviews are always very much appreciated on any and all of your favorite podcast platforms. Once again, a little bit of a scheduling update tonight. Upon further review, Brian Driscoll and Vince D'Addario will also be having IB Nation Sports Talk at 6 o'clock. So make sure that you guys stay tuned and hit that notification bell for future shows. All right, y'all, let's get into a little bit of the commit recap from this past weekend. I'm really excited for this one. I genuinely, everyone knows this about me, but I'm just a football junkie, right? So I love seeing players develop, have big time performances, and just kind of recap those big time performances each and every week. Because I feel like as a collective, there are some players in the 2024 class for Notre Dame that are committed that Notre Dame fans, and myself included to this, guys, remember, I'm a Notre Dame fan at heart. have not given enough credit to as far as what they were when they initially committed to the University of Notre Dame and what they have developed into. So I want to get into, I'm going to break this up kind of positionally a little bit because I really kind of want to hit on some key points here more than just spewing out stats. And guys, if you want to go to irishbreakdown.com right now, I have the commit recap. Like you can read that for yourself, right? You can see the stats and everything. I'm going to read them real quick, but I really want to talk about like what this stuff means, you know? Why this matters, why we do this each and every week. We do this each and every week. This shows developments or lack of developments, wherever it might be. So I want to really dive into these players. And of course, it starts offensively with the backfield and with Mr. CJ Carr, who is a 2024 quarterback out of the state of Michigan. Everybody knows the backstory. Lloyd Carr's grandson. Notre Dame was able to go into Michigan and get a very talented quarterback in the 2024 class. Second game of the season. Saline High School defeated Dexter 41-25. If y'all remember this game last year, for anybody that's maybe near that program or near that area in general, Dexter actually had defeated CJ Carr and his team last year 21-14. So this is a little bit of payback. And CJ looked like he took it personal in this one. He led the Hornets to obviously a 16-point victory, but CJ passed for 317 yards in this victory and accounted for 4 touchdowns on the day. He had 2 rushing touchdowns, 2 passing touchdowns, over 300 yards for back-to-back weeks. CJ Carr, and I don't have to say this, folks, really good football player, obviously, right? One of the top quarterbacks in the 2024 recruiting class. And he has now shown that in back-to-back weeks, throwing for 300 yards. He did throw 1 interception on the week. But if you watch that one, he was just trying to get it was a short intermediate crosser, I believe, and I think it actually hit off someone's helmet and got batted up into the air. So it wasn't like a poor decision. If he was able to kind of get through that passing window, it was going to be an easy completion for a pretty nice game. But ball hit his helmet, popped up in the air. CJ Carr was intercepted. But I mean, the overall vantage point of that game was CJ played fantastic. 317 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 2 passing touchdowns, 41-25 victory. Outstanding start to the year for CJ, who, if people remember, he got off to a little bit of a slow start last year in game 1, and it kind of took him a couple games to really kind of hit his stride. CJ has been fantastic through the first 2 weeks, which is very nice to see as far as that development of starting a little bit quicker. And yeah, I mean, he just was off to a really good start, but he wasn't the only one in the future for Notre Dame that were off to great starts. Kedron Young, Lufkin, Texas High School defeated, and I'm going to pronounce this incredibly wrong, Nakadachis. My apologies for any Texas people out there. I know I'm going to get DMs or some messages on the Irish Breakdown message. Dude, pronounce that incredibly wrong. I get it. Trust me. Lufkin defeated them, however, 47-28. For the second straight game, Kedron Young went for over 100 yards, ran for 104 yards, and also had 51 receiving yards in this victory as well. So 185 total yards and 2 rushing touchdowns in the victory. We also had Aeneas Williams, other running back committed in the 2024 class, who well, sorry, I was just reading a little bit of cracking. Is that voice my cracking? I just want to make sure that this is me before I read. Nakadocious. Oh, there it is. Nakadocious. My apologies, E3. If anybody is for anybody listening right now, if you could just send me like, does the audio sound okay? I just saw someone said a little bit of cracking. I just want to make sure that this is not an issue as I continue to move forward. It's me. Yes, there's a little bit of, okay, there's a little bit. All right, hold on one sec, folks. Let me get this figured out real quick. 1 sec. All right, fellas. Hopefully it sounds a little bit better. My apologies. I hope that remedied it pretty quickly there. So wanted to move on to Aeneas Williams, who of course is the running back out of Hannibal High School. And if you just want to just throw a, yeah, it sounds better now in the chat, would be very much appreciated. Again, kind of doing a little bit of not a little bit, doing the solo show today. So just want to make sure that everything sounds audio quality solid for you all. So cool. Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate you all so much. Aeneas Williams, 4 touchdowns this past weekend in Hannibal's victory over Jefferson City, 42-21. We also had Justin Thurman. Unfortunately, Tampa Jesuit did not have a great result this past weekend. He's a 2020 committed to the University of Notre Dame. They fell to Treasure Coast 67-28. Apparently, Treasure Coast is very good this year. I don't know much about them, but they're obviously had a pretty good start to the year. He ran for 48 yards and a touchdown on 9 carries. But overall, guys, I think that a great talking point here would be, let's talk about the running back depth that's going to be moving forward for Notre Dame, right? We talk about Audric Estime on a week-to-week basis. We're going to talk about Jadarian Price for the next couple years. We're going to be talking about Jeremiah. I mean, Jeremiah Love looked fantastic in his, what was it, like 4 carries for 50 yards. Am I cracking again? Can someone kind of throw in the chat here? Is it bad again? I mean, I'm just reading the chat, guys. Just want to make sure that the audio is okay for y'all. And this is a little bit frustrating. So if y'all just want to send a little what's up in the chat. Sounds okay. Doesn't sound okay. Oh, man. Okay. All right. Give me 1 second, folks. My apologies. Frustrating. 1 second. All right, hopefully that sounds a little bit better. It's not about pushing through, Tommy. It's if the audio is not good, then it is a little bit tough to get it on the podcast platform afterwards. So I just want to make sure it sounds okay and sounds solid enough at least to get it to the next step. So it's not a pushing through thing. It's more a making sure that it's usable kind of moving forward. So all right. So I want to talk about these running backs though, folks, because again, we can hyper focus on Audric Estime for very good reason. We can hyper-focus on Jadarian Price for very good reason. We can focus on Jeremiah Love for very good reason. Jabron Payne for very good reason. These running backs in this class, or on this team right now for Notre Dame, are tremendous. But I want to talk about a little bit of these breakouts, for the 2024 class especially. We know that I think most people know that if they listen to this podcast at this point, we're big fans of Kedron Young. Brian loves him. I've loved him for a while as well. Runs for 134 yards, 51 receiving yards. But the great thing about this class is that also with Aeneas Williams in it, who's more of the all-purpose back, these players are very, very different. And I think that you all have kind of seen probably highlights of Kedron Young. I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into Kedron Young in a future message board update, a little bit of, a little bit of a deeper dive into the film so far this season. 5'11", 220 pounds, physical dude running downhill, who also has incredible bursts for a player his size at 5'11". Told he's about 220 pounds now, which is, he was 210 pounds during his junior season. He combines that with Aeneas Williams, though, and Aeneas Williams is a 5'11", 5'10", 200-pound back that runs the football, obviously at a very high, very, very well, and he's a physical runner, downhill runner as well, but he's got a little bit more of that space element to him, and he catches the football incredibly well. He can block. He's got that all-purpose feel to him. That's kind of Aeneas's game. And I think that when you couple those together, I'm going to make a statement here that I think most people probably won't agree with on separate channels or maybe even in here to a degree. I would not trade that two-man class with any team in the 2024 class. I wouldn't do it. Wouldn't do it. I have visions already, folks, after watching Notre Dame ability to run the football over the first 2 games. I have visions already of what Kedron Young can do behind this offensive line. I have visions of what Aeneas Williams can do as a Jabron Payne-ish type of running back. And the crazy part is, I don't really know. I'm going to make, all right, here's another statement. Here's another take. I hope you all like this one. Kedron Young is going to be the most talented running back on the roster in 2024 outside of Jeremiah Love, in my opinion. I truly believe that. He's different than what Jeremiah brings to the game, which I think will also play into how they are utilized better. But I really think that Kedron Young he's Audric Estime with more juice. Like that's how I view him. And Jonas Gray is a person that's kind of come to my mind at some points, just kind of during this process. I think that they are very similar football players because for a guy that's as big as he is at 215, 220 pounds, what Kedron Young is, the acceleration and the change of direction skills like they're different. They're unique. They're not ordinary, right? Like this is what happens in scouting and evaluating. You have a preconceived notion of a player, right? Like you see him. And if you saw Kedron Young just staring at him, you look at him and you just say, that young man is going to be a physical downhill runner who is a no-nonsense type of player. But then you watch his film, and that's not at all the player that you get on film, in my opinion. Yes, he can do that stuff. He can serve the Audric Estime role if that's what you want him to do. The physical, break tackles, extra yardage, hidden yardage. He can do all that stuff. But what makes Kedron so unique is he can also do the other stuff, right? Like he make guys miss in space. He can break angles, work into the sideline. He can outrun defenders. He can do all of those things, which I saw someone in the chat compare him to a Nick Chubb. And I don't think that's unrealistic, man. I don't like comparing guys to players who might be the best athlete at their position in the NFL. I mean, I know that's a good debate, actually. Some people would say Saquon Barkley. Some people would say, a couple different players. But, I mean, Nick Chubb is in the conversation at least. He is a different type of cat because at 225 pounds, I mean, that kid can explode and create massive plays, right? And I think that for me, like I look at a guy like a Kedron Young and I say, like, that kid is a runaway freight train with more juice than you would anticipate. Like he makes guys miss an open space. He creates explosive runs. And when he gets out in the open, he rarely ever gets caught from behind. So Nick Chubb's actually a really interesting comp, man. I might steal that one. For whoever put that one in the chat. So I just wanted to highlight those running backs real quick, folks. Because I know that we know that they're good, right? I don't think there's any question that we look at them and say they're tremendous football players. But I also think that we are not quite giving them enough credit as far as how good of football players they are. So I really want to, I just really want us to kind of appreciate that for a second, what Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams, and then also what Justin Thurman in the 2025 class is going to bring to the Notre Dame table. All right, let's talk wide receivers in the 2024 class. We had, of course, Cam Williams, who his team has gotten off to another nice start. Glenbard South defeated Fenton 56-0 this past weekend, in which Cam Williams just scores in so many different ways, right? I mean, because you can just talk about the ordinary wide receiver stuff that he does. And I say ordinary very sarcastically, right? Because there's nothing ordinary about it. I mean, in his first game of the year, he had 7 catches for 100 and no, it's not apple cider. It's iced tea. I'm sorry. I need a little bit of iced tea for the throat. Sorry. You guys know that you can't put stuff in the chat asking me questions off the cuff because then I lose my train of thought, man. ADHD. I keep telling you all that. I tell you that every single week. And you get me preoccupied and I lose my train of thought. But I was talking about Cam Williams because 7 catches, 153 yards the first week. And obviously I'm just joking. I hope everyone knows that I hope my sarcasm comes off on this podcast well enough now where you guys know when I'm just joking. So 153 yard. Enigma, I'm totally kidding, man. Don't say sorry, please. I'm just joking. So yeah, I know Gideon. I know where I am, man. I know. Cam Williams. 7 catches, 153 yards 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, had 5 total touchdowns. Did not have a receiving touchdown this past week, but had a 68-yard jet sweep that he took to the house. My guy is not just a wide receiver. My guy is not just a multi-level threat. Not a guy that can just catch short, intermediate, and deep. He can also run jet sweeps. I mean, guys, if you saw his play from this past week, and it's going to be a little bit of a breakdown I do on the message board today. I'm going to do kind of a top 5 plays from this past week from the high school perspective. I mean, Cam Williams, and I know there's going to be some people that say, football in the state of Illinois, and would he be able to do that stuff in the state of Texas and Florida and California and Georgia? And people are going to talk about that, right? And it's fair. I completely get it, right? I mean, competition matters. It does. But Cam Williams is, you want to talk about a talking point here. I think, and I want to phrase this properly because this is going to sound very homerish, and I want to make sure that this does not come off homerish because this is actual analysis. Jeremiah Smith in the 2024 class is a dude, probably the top receiver in the country. Although I think Micah Hudson out of the state of Texas is also an absolute dude. Cam Williams is in that conversation though for being the best wide receiver in the 2024 class, in my opinion. He is. Will he end up being the top receiver in the 2024 class? Probably not at the end of the day. I mean, he won't, if we're being honest with ourselves, right? Because he's a Notre Dame commit, he plays in the state of Illinois. There's going to be some things that people kind of knock him for, which is just really, really dumb. But he's 6'2", 190-something pounds, can win all levels of the field, is incredibly talented with the football in his hands, has very strong hands for his style as well. And I really, really think that if you dropped him in anywhere in the country, Cam Williams would be who Cam Williams is. And I think that there is going to be a conversation for me. If Cam Williams continues to do what he's doing as a senior, nationally, I think people will start having more open conversation about this. Because I already think that Cam Williams is a 5-star recruit. I do. I already think that he's a 5-star in the 2024 class. But I think that there's a conversation that needs to happen about, is Cam Williams a top 3 player at his position in the 2024 recruiting class? Because again, I think that a couple of guys at the top of the group, in my opinion, I know there's some guys that are ranked ahead of Micah Hudson out of Texas, but I mean, I'm still on this guy's like Micah Hudson. I think is a stud. Like I think that kid's a 5-star. I think that Jeremiah Smith is obviously a 5-star. I think those two are probably the 2 best receivers in the country that I have seen outside of Cam Williams. I really want us as a collective, and I'll talk about the Notre Dame perspective for a second because there will be some bias that will be thrown in there. But I want us to be able to, as a collective nationally, to have a legitimate conversation about, is Cam Williams the best receiver in the 2024 recruiting class? Because if I showed you just raw film of them and we isolate the traits, right? Just the traits. Let's forget about the competition for a second. Let's talk about the smoothness, the body control, the explosiveness, the long speed. Let's isolate those traits and put him next to Jeremiah Smith and Micah Hudson and Ryan Wingo and some of the best receivers in the 2024 class. Is Cam Williams not in that conversation? I mean, let's be serious about this. Like, is he not in that conversation? I don't think there's much of a difference, if there is any, with those players, which I know, again, it's going to be some Ohio State fans that listen to this that are like, oh, Jeremiah Smith, blah, 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 blah. And again, if your opinion is that Jeremiah Smith is the top receiver in the 2024 recruiting class, I'm not going to push back hard on it because Jeremiah Smith's excellent. Wherever Micah Hudson ends up going, wherever it is in the state of Texas, if you want to tell me Micah Hudson's the best receiver in the 2024 class, I wouldn't push back on you because I think he's tremendous. But I also say this, bias aside, if someone in this chat right now told me I think that Cam Williams is the best receiver in the 2024 recruiting class nationally, I would not push back on you. I would. I believe that he is a absolute dog. I think that he brings every skill set to the table that I look at and say, that kid is a legitimate 5-star, top 20 player in the 2024 recruiting class, and a guy that no matter where he plays could be dominant. Throw him into Georgia, throw him into Texas, throw him into California, throw him into Florida. It doesn't matter. Cam Williams is a superstar, in my opinion. It's going to be hard to keep him off the field as a freshman. And I say that with slight hesitation because we have to remember outside of Matt Salerno, Notre Dame brings everyone back potentially, right? Like Deion Colzie can come back in 2024. Tobias Merriweather will be back in 2024. Jaden Thomas will be back in 2024. Jaden Greathouse, Rico Flores, Tobias Merriweather. I think I may have said Tobias' name twice, but they all come back in 2024. Caleb Smith comes back in 2024. By the way, there's 2 other recruits in the 2024 class at wide receiver for Notre Dame that will also be coming in 2024 and are both extremely talented. Despite that, I would not bet against Cam Williams playing for Notre Dame as a freshman in 2024 and making an impact. I wouldn't bet against it. Every single week now, and this was last year as well, but it's now the first couple weeks of this year, I'm watching Cam Williams be the best player on the field by a landslide. No matter who he plays, he is the best player on the field. Even in defeats, even when they play against a school that is just better than them and they defeat them. I'm talking about last year. I still think Cam Williams is the best player on the field. I still have. I've never watched a game of Cam Williams and thought there was a player better on the field than Cam Williams. I think he's that special on the level that he plays. So I just really want to shout out Cam Williams again because just tremendous football player. Because the crazy part was he didn't even have the most productive week of a wide receiver in the 2024 class. Let's talk about a couple of the other guys because it's just an embarrassment of riches at this point. Micah Gilbert, who is a 2024 wide receiver out of Charlotte, North Carolina Christian. They defeated South Point 41-36 this past week. And Micah Gilbert had his most productive game of the season. 10 receptions, 173 yards, 2 more touchdowns. He now has 4 touchdown receptions in the last 2 weeks. By the way, plays safety for Charlotte Christian as well. Had 7 total tackles this past week and a fumble recovery for Charlotte Christian in this victory as well. Guys, I'm here to tell you this. There might not be a guy that is more disrespected in a ranking in the 2024 class of wide receiver than Micah Gilbert is either. He's barely a top 250 player by a couple different platforms. Barely. Give my guy some credit. Give him some credit. He had 7 catches, 133 yards 2 weeks ago, 2 touchdowns. Now has 10 receptions, 173 yards, 2 touchdowns. His worst week so far was 5 receptions for 65 yards in the opener where they won. They're now 3-0. And I'm going to get to Bryce Young here too, folks. I'm going to get to Bryce Young, and he's doing some special stuff as well. Micah Gilbert's a really good football player. That's a top 150 kid right now. I think he could be a top 100 player when it all is said and done. Micah Gilbert's a dude, man. Start giving him some credit. He is a really, really good football player. That's not a secondary option for Notre Dame, right? Where it's like, oh, Cam and then a bunch of solid players. No, Micah Gilbert's a dude. He's a dude. He's a really good football player. Had another great week in back-to-back. And then, by the way, Logan Saldate didn't have the biggest stat line of the week, but he only played a little bit into the second half because his team, Palma High School in the state of California, they defeated King City 42-0. And basically just in the first half, Logan Saldate has 6 receptions for 55 yards and a touchdown a week after having 171 yards in his first week. So, again, we're talking about a kid that's the 3rd wide receiver in a 2024 class for Notre Dame. That threesome, and I talked about it last week in the podcast, so I don't want to go super in-depth on this right now. But Saldate, Gilbert, and Cam Williams is a dynamic 3-man class. You want to talk about going from Rico Flores, Jaden Greathouse, Braylon James, and Caleb Smith now to Cam Williams, Logan Saldate, and Micah Gilbert. What a tremendous 2-year stretch for Chancey Stuckey as a recruiter. A guy that we didn't know much about, a guy that had question marks coming into his Notre Dame tenure because he'd only been a position coach 1 year at Baylor, and he had no recruiting background. We had no idea what we were going to get out of Chancey Stuckey from a recruiting perspective. He has transformed that wide receiver room, has absolutely transformed it. And I mean, that's not the only pass catchers that we can talk about too. Jack Larson is a player that has had a tremendous start to the year as well. Unfortunately, Charlotte Catholic, who was on ESPN this past week, they fell to Providence Day 42-7. If people that know that area, Providence Day is an absolute stellar football team. Jack, though, has 4 touchdowns through 3 games, and he's a tight end that it doesn't get much talk from Notre Dame fans in the 2024 class is all. So I really think that this just pass catching group in 2024 is just insane, and you could throw Jack Larson into that conversation as well, because yes, he's a tight end, he's not a wide receiver, but we'll open it up to pass catchers, right? We can put them all in the same bucket because they are going to make a lot of plays at the University of Notre Dame. Pass catchers were on full display this past weekend. I want to really quickly go through the offensive linemen in the 2024 class that are committed because, obviously you can't get much stats out of a player as far as, unless we're breaking down the all 22 or the film from this past weekend. I don't have words that can really analyze these guys without doing a deep dive into the film. But all 3 commits in the 2024 class for Notre Dame got big victories this past weekend. Started with Anthony Knapp, who Roswell High School is now sitting at 3-0. They defeated Marietta, Georgia, 51-14. Roswell ran for 375 total yards and scored 7 touchdowns. If people have watched Anthony Knapp so far this year, he is really, really taken a huge step forward as a senior, as has Styles Prescott, who is a offensive tackle out of Fishers, Indiana, Hamilton Southeastern. They defeated Avon 42-23 in another dominating victory. There was a great picture that was circulating on X, I guess we can't call it Twitter anymore, of Styles that was just kind of standing next to some other Notre Dame recruits. And I think he had some of his teammates that came to campus as well. And my God, he is a big dude, man. I mean, he's listed at like 6'6", 270, but guys, like, I think that he has grown a little bit as well. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if Styles has ended up like 6'6" and a half, and he might be more in the 280-pound range than the 270 that he's listed at right now, because he played at around 260 as a junior. There was word that he had gained about 20 pounds this offseason. Styles has looked really good. I mean, I broke down on the message board a couple of his blocks the first game of the season, and I thought Styles looked really, really good. So he's taken a massive step forward. Peter Jones out of Malvern Prep had his first victory this season as well. Malvern, for people that are in Pennsylvania, it's a very good school. They played LaSalle College, and they won 13-7. It was a little bit of a grinded out physical type of conversation, which if you've ever watched Malvern Prep, especially last year, this is what they were doing all season. I mean, they were winning like 20-13, 9-7, like that type of thing, right? And, they're just kind of grinded out type of players. So Peter Jones, one of the more unappreciated players in the 2024 class for Notre Dame. I think we forget that, like, Peter Jones is a really good player. He's been committed to the class for so long, and he's an offensive lineman that people just tend to not talk about him a ton. But again, I really like this offensive line class for what it is. If Notre Dame is able to land Garrett Lambert, which we still feel good about, and I know we'll talk about a little bit in the mailbag later, then I think that Notre Dame has a chance to put together a really good offensive line class for 2024, 4-man class under Joe Rudolph in his first year. And yeah, I think that Notre Dame has done a good job in recruiting offensive line in 2024, especially with, and because I put this out in the universe already, but I just want to repeat myself because I think it's necessary. When Anthony Knapp committed to Notre Dame, I had my reservations. And through the first 3 games, he's played stellar football in a nice classification in the state of Georgia, played some really good teams on a week-to-week basis for the most part. And if you look at some of the stuff, he had a 33-inch vertical this offseason. He's grown, his body is developing. I think that, again, I think that may end up being a really good evaluation by Joe Rudolph. And I hope it was, because I just did not love him when I liked him, didn't love him though. And I think that he's taken a step forward, which is a great thing to see. So that's going to kind of recap the offensive side. Let's go to the defensive side next. Logan Thomas, defensive end out of St. Edward in Lakewood, Ohio. They defeated Rock Creek Christian 42-14. Logan has looked very good so far through the first 3 weeks for St. Edward. Obviously, he was down in Katy, Texas, playing his football down there. And he now obviously playing up in the state of Ohio for a team that has won back-to-back state championships and gunning for a three-peat. He's looked very good so far. Cole Mullins is unfortunately still down, but for Mill Creek in the state of Georgia, but Mill Creek destroyed Archer. What a terrible name, by the way. I don't know who would ever name anything Archer. It's just such a terrible name. But they defeated Archer 42-7. As I throw some shade at Archer, our resident Ohio State fan in the chat. Hopefully he's listening to that, or else that may not have hit that little bit of a shot at him there. I hope Archer's listening. Bryce Young, Charlotte Christian, already mentioned, they defeated South Point 41-36 this past weekend. And guys, I put this in an article that was out this morning. You guys know that I'm not like one of those people that typically has impulse takes that like I'm just like I'm basically over emotional and I just put a take out there. I like to just kind of let things settle for a couple weeks and like, let's think this out. Let's let this develop. I'm almost ready to make this take though, fully. Bryce Young looks like a top 50 recruit to me right now, based upon the film he's put out the first 3 weeks. He does. I mean, it's every single week now. He is stacking incredible days. It's not like one great game, then you don't see him for 2 games. It's not one good game, one solid game, and then 2 subpar games. Like every single week now, Bryce Young is starting to stack games. He's starting to stack it. And that's all I wanted to see. That's one of the biggest things I want to see with Bryce, is that Bryce, I mean, it might be a little bit over emotional, Enigma, but like I've let this one settle for a couple weeks. Like I didn't just say this after the first week when he had 2 sacks and X amount of tackles for loss in their first victory. He has been stacking weeks, and now at the size that he is, the physical freak that he is, him now taking things to a next step, like a player that I wasn't big on at all when he first committed to Notre Dame. Or I should say, I wasn't big on at all when he was first offered by Notre Dame last year. Wasn't. But he has taken a tremendous step. You know, he was a kid that played wide receiver, played defense, but now he's strictly a defensive end and he's grown into his frame. Man, he looks like just a different cat this year. He really does. And again, like I think that what you're trying to find, and because you have to give credit, to the schools that have kind of dominated the last 10 years of football, right? Of college football. Because Clemson's obviously in there, but the teams that you really are going to think about are the SEC schools, the Georgias, the Alabamas. And you want to get players that you look like they could just get thrown into an Alabama jersey or a Georgia jersey and not look out of place, right? You're trying to find that type of athlete. And that's what Bryce Young is, man. That's what he is. Like, if you could watch Bryce Young on the hoof physically in a Georgia uniform and be like, that dude belongs at the University of Georgia. That's what he looks like right now. And them getting Notre Dame able to get in commitment from him, obviously he has the ties as a legacy to the University of Notre Dame. His father, obviously Bryant Young, was one of the best players to ever play for the University of Notre Dame. He's in the college football and the NFL Hall of Fame. But I think one that we can't just kind of skate over or look past is that there have been some Notre Dame legacies, I think of Emmett Mosley specifically, that Notre Dame should have been a big player there because of the legacy aspect. But They ended up not being the pick because he wanted to do something different. He wanted to blaze his own trail. So Notre Dame identified Bryce at an early age. He was still a developmental player, still developing his frame, still growing. But again, looks like a really good evaluation. And all of a sudden, Bryce Young, Logan Thomas, who at one point, if I told you that was your top two defensive ends, and we'll throw Cole Mullins into there. If I told you that Bryce Young, Logan Thomas, and Cole Mullins in early spring last year, or this past year, if I told you that that was the three-man defensive end haul, most people would be very underwhelmed with that. Because at the time, let's call it what it is. Cole Mullins is a player that was it's still considered a consensus 3-star, and now is out with an injury. Bryce Young was considered a 4-star by like one platform, but everyone admitted like this is just off of projection and upside. That's purely what it is. And Logan Thomas was a lightly built 200-pound defensive end at the time. Now, fast forwarding to September, where we are now, it's tremendous, man. I mean, now you have Logan Thomas, who has filled out his frame, looks longer than he did as a junior. Bryce Young, who is just a completely different animal. And Cole Mullins, who I think at worst, everyone knows Brian's a lot higher on Cole than I am. Like, I think Cole's a good football player, though, but I really think that Cole Mullins at worst is a really good floor player. Like, he's going to play physically, strong hands in the run game, come out low, play with good pad level. He's at least going to be a really good run defender. You know, I question what the upside is as a pass rusher personally. That's just me, though. But I really think that this defensive end class is a lot better than what we originally anticipated. And again, it's a shout out to the Notre Dame staff for doing good evaluations. That's what it is. They did a good evaluation on Logan Thomas. They did a good evaluation on Bryce Young and trusted his genes to take him to the next step. So a couple great evaluations, which is really nice to see. Defensive tackles in the 2024 and 2025 class that were in action. Sean Sevillano, Clearwater, Florida Academy International. They narrowly lost to Edgewater 15-14. But for the second straight week and third week overall, Sean Sevillano was a man amongst boys again in his game that he played. Week before, he had 11 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks. He followed that up against Edgewater with 7 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a sack. So in the last 2 weeks, Sean Sevillano has 18 total tackles, 8 tackles for loss, and 4 sacks playing on the interior. So, yeah, really good start to the year for Sean Sevillano. Davion Dixon's team, he's now at Miami Palmetto in the state of Florida. They defeated Lakeland 26-12. They're off to a 2-0 start this season. Linebackers in the 2024 class that were in action for Notre Dame. Let's roll through these ones. Kingston Viliamo Asa, who's out of Bellflower, California, St. John Bosco. They defeated Friendship Collegiate Academy 48-12 to now extend their winning streak. They are undefeated on the season. Kingston had a pick 6 in this football game. Kingston's a top 50 player in this class, in my opinion. He is. He looks really, really explosive and really, really instinctive. When you add those two things together, you got a potentially special football player, man. So Kingston's really good. I'm not breaking news there, though, folks. You all know that Kingston Viliamo Asa is a really, really good football player. That's not good analysis on my part. That's just speaking truth. Everyone knows he's really good. Bodie Cahoon had another big week this past week, had double-digit tackles in Patrick Henry's 31-21 victory over Glass. His first week, he had 17 tackles and 2 tackles for loss in his first victory. Double-digit tackles for the second straight week. Bodie Cahoon out of Roanoke, Virginia. Patrick Henry, I think that's going to be another really good evaluation in the end. 6'2", 220 pounds, 6'3", 220 pounds, somewhere in that ballpark. Bodie is having a great season. A player that was very new to the linebacker position coming into the year, but has really looked good through 2 games. Teddy Rizak, he's a tough player to evaluate right now. His team, Omaha, Nebraska West Side, defeated Grand Island 45-0. Rizak ended the day with 4 total tackles and 2 pass breakups in the game, but for the second straight game, he barely played into the second half. So stats are not going to qualify quite how good Teddy's been. I'm interested as he gets further into a season when they start playing a little bit better of competition. what the stats starts looking like. So Teddy's a talented athlete, and he had a good game against Grand Island, but I'm looking forward to seeing how his game kind of continues to mature. Yeah. So obviously he's 6'4", 195 pounds, very good athlete, being projected as a rover by Notre Dame to eventually move inside. He's a player that I think we're going to have to really evaluate at the end of the season. You know, like we could watch Bryce Young, for instance, right now, and we can see what he's doing on a week-to-week basis because he's playing in a lot of competitive football games. Teddy Rizak isn't. 45-0. They beat a team, I think it was 57-0 in the first week. So he just hasn't played a ton in the first 2 weeks. Like he's playing first halves of football games. So let's evaluate him at the end of the season, but his team is off to a tremendous start. Defensive back-wise, let's round this out. Bronte Johnson, of course, is still out for Northside. He is expected back next week. They lost to Bishop Dwenger 21-12 this past week. They could really use Bronte Johnson back for Northside in the state of Indiana. Plays wide receiver and defensive back for the team, and they are struggling a little bit without him. They're certainly doing that. Defensive backs for Notre Dame other than Bronte. Carson Hobbs' team fell to East Central. He plays for Cincinnati, Ohio, Archbishop Moeller. They lost 38-28 on this game, falling to 1-2 on the season so far. Archbishop Moeller has big expectations. They went 12-2 last year, so off to a 1-2 start. They're expecting to kind of rebound here. Carson Hobbs had a really good football game in this one, though. He ended the game with 7 total tackles, was not targeted a single time during that game. It was hysterical. I watched some of this football game, and they were avoiding Carson. Like, they just did not throw a single pass at Carson. Leonard Moore, who's out of Round Rock High School in the state of Texas, they lost a narrow defeat to Regan High School, 35-28. Leonard Moore had another really good football game, though. He ended up with 8 total tackles, did not give up a completion in this game, and also averaged 28.5 yards per kickoff return in that one as well. So Leonard Moore had a good football game. Carson Hobbs both had really good games this past weekend. Kennedy Erlacher for his Chandler High School, another one that's just a little bit hard to evaluate just Kennedy right now because Chandler has played 2 blowouts so far. They won 57-7 week 1, didn't play in the second half. Chandler won 49-7, barely played in the second half. So Kennedy just hasn't played a ton in this, especially in this victory over Mountain Ridge this past weekend. But his Chandler defense has only given up 14 total points in 2 weeks. And I believe one of those were on the second team in the second half in the first game. So, yeah, leading a very good Chandler defense. And then Tabron Benny Powell. They finally got in the win column. They've lost 2 very tough, hard-fought football games. They've only let up 28 total points through 3 weeks. And that is Westchester, Ohio, Lakota West. Again, the school of Ben Minnick, who's now part of Notre Dame roster in the 2023 class, safety. Tabron Benny Powell in the 2024 class. They defeated Fairfield 33-0. He's won. I have seen a lot of film so far on Tabron. I think Tabron has looked a lot better than I anticipated. I was not a fan of that commitment when it first happened. I think he could also be a good evaluation by this staff. He's looked a lot quicker than I thought he was going to be. He's still a player that brings that physicality. He's striking and coming to balance and making his impact felt as a tackler. But the passing game stuff, like he's looked a lot better navigating space. He had a couple pass breakups last week, and he's putting together a good senior season. So I'm hoping for the state of safety recruiting in 2024 that Notre Dame hit on Tabron Benny Powell because he's a really talented kid who I think was playing. I mean, I know he was playing out of position as a junior in 2022. Was playing more of an outside linebacker and kind of rover role for Lakota West. Now playing a true safety spot, he's looked a lot more comfortable, which is very interesting to see. So Tabron Benny Powell, last player this week, 33-0 over Fairfield, victory for Lakota West. Folks, that's a recap of this past weekend as far as the commit recap for what players did during their games. We are going to get next because we're not going anywhere. I still got well over an hour with y'all today. Next, I had a great opportunity to sit down with Sona Young, who is the mother of 2024 running back commit Kedron Young out of Lufkin, Texas. I had a chance to sit down with her several weeks ago and discuss Kedron, discuss his recruiting process, discuss Notre Dame, and everything in between. So I'm going to get into that interview next, and then we're also going to do a mailbag at the end. So you can keep throwing mailbag questions into the chat. I will keep starring as I kind of play this pre-recorded video. But again, real quick, hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast. 5-star reviews are always very much appreciated. Make sure that you all are signed up at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We'll have recruiting intel, we'll have team intel, and everything in between kind of moving forward here. So make sure you go sign up today. But that's going to do it for this section of the Notre Dame recruiting. Folks, let's talk Kedron Young, and no better person to give us a little insight into Kedron Young, star running back in the 2024 class, committed to the University of Notre Dame, than his mother. Let's get into it. Welcome, everyone, to the Irish Breakdown podcast. We got a nice little interview edition. Everybody knows that this is probably my favorite part of this process, getting to know the players, the future players of Notre Dame football. But if you watch this in the 2023 cycle, you know that we developed a lot of great relationships with some awesome parents. I think back to Glenn James. I think back to Shonda Gray, Christian Gray's mother. I think back to Don Schuler or Don Schuler's father. There was Debbie Otting, Joe Otting's mother as well. We developed so many great relationships and got so many great perspectives, which I think is very important in today's world, to getting these perspectives on the recruiting process, because it is crazy at times. It is chaotic. So wanted to bring on, it's crazy. I wanted to bring on Sona Young, who is the mother of Kedron Young, star running back out of Lufkin, Texas, of course, committed to the University of Notre Dame in the 2024 class. Sona, first of all, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're super busy. It's the summertime. You're an educator, but I know you're doing the school thing. You're being mom, doing all that type of stuff. But thank you so much for joining the show. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. So the parents' perspective, I really want to dig into this a little bit, get some insight into what you saw during this process, how Kedron handled everything, just a little bit into your family background as well, I think would be awesome. So let me start you out by asking, you're obviously are a Texas family, and in Texas, football is king, football is religion. We all know that. Was there a moment for Kedron specifically where you saw him play at whatever age it was, and you were like, oh, he's that guy. Like he's going to be a pretty dang good football player.
Okay, so Kedron said in his interview, they interviewed him for the news here. So he played baseball and basketball. He played football when he was like 7, I guess, or whatever. And they went to the Super Bowl, and it was awesome. They lost in the Super Bowl. He was all sad. And then he played the next year. The next year, he didn't play a lot. And so he didn't like it because he felt like he didn't get to play. And he was just like, I don't want to do it anymore. He's like, I never got to really play. I just don't feel like it's something that I want to do. He'd been playing basketball and baseball longer, and he ran every thing that they had, any kind of run, he was in it. So he was like, I don't want to play. And then they watched Concussion. I let him and his brother watch Concussion, and then they decided they were never going to play football again. And then we got to 7th grade, and then he's like, oh, Mom, I'm going to be on the football team and all this. And I'm like, what? I thought we weren't playing football. But apparently in Texas, 7th grade, they pull everybody in. Everybody wants to play football. So he's playing football in 7th grade. And then by 8th grade, it gets pretty, intense. And I think that's when I saw that he was able to master football like he was mastering the other sports. Like I'm like, oh, okay. And then people were hitting him. He was a quarterback then. And I mean, he's getting pancakes. He's getting, smashed. And he's just taking it in stride. He's getting back up. And I'm like, okay, all right. High school, he moved to defense. He did great at defense. It took him some time to get it down. And honestly, we didn't really realize that it was going to be football only solely football. Ninth grade, he played every single sport. Sophomore year, he played every single sport until sophomore year. And then that's when we
Wow.
started having the serious, conversations about what he needs to do. And we decided that if football was going to get him a scholarship and make, get him the success that he needed to go to the next level, which is college, then that's what he needed to do. And so we decided to go all football.
Is he? So I need to ask because Kedron, like he makes everything look so easy on a football field. So I'm curious with him playing different sports and being the student that he is. Is he like one of those kids that just was always just naturally good at everything? You know, like those kids you hate. You're like, how are you always so good at every single thing you do? Is he one of those?
Okay, so he'll tell you that in his first year when he played basketball, he sucked. He was like, I sucked. It was hilarious. It was fun. I think the last game, he finally figured out what he was doing, and he scored like 10 points or something. Six, I don't know. We went to Walmart after, and I'll never forget him walking through Walmart telling everybody how many points he scored in this game. And then he works really hard. I'll say that. And he's somebody that you can say, go do this. And he's gonna look at you and he's listening, he's soaking it up, and then he goes out and he tries to execute it. And I think that's probably um the best quality for him as far as an athlete goes, is because he's fully engaged. He's listening, he's taking it in, and he's trying to figure out how he can execute whatever it is that you're telling him. As he's gotten older, he studies. So somebody may go out and play and be good and they're just good, or whatever, but he's studying the team, he's studying what he did the last time, he's studying how come he couldn't get how come I couldn't get around him. He's studying it all. So he's a learner, a student of the game. He's always trying to learn, he's always trying to be better. And so that's what to me, that's what sets him apart now, is because he's constantly trying to be better, he's trying to figure it out. But if you tell him to do it, he's going to go out there and try to do it.
I love it. I love it. Well, let me ask you, because I know that this process can be really daunting. And then Kedron obviously is, offers from Notre Dame and Michigan and Texas A&M and a lot of great schools. When did the madness of recruiting start, and how do you feel like he handled it? Because I know it can be a chaotic world.
I'll say the beginning of like maybe September, October of his junior year, it got pretty serious. Mm-hmm. By January, February, we were, it was, somebody's calling every day. I'm telling him they called. He's like, oh, they call me too. He's on the phone all the time with a coach. He's like, a holiday comes, he's talked to literally every single coach that's offered him. Once we got to about April, it was he's not gonna say it's overwhelming. He's not gonna, unless it's like he can't function,
Sure.
And so he's just like, we were both going through it, making it work, talking to the coaches and doing whatever, trying to manage the visits, scheduling, doing whatever we could, going to the spring games. And then he had a teacher that called and told me that he was not focused. Now, if he doesn't understand, he doesn't understand. If he didn't do his assignment, he didn't do his assignment. But not focused, like in class, that's not him. That's not right. How he is. So once I heard that, I knew that it was out of control. And so at that point, as a parent, I just asked that everybody just stop. I took his phone anyway, but I told him, just give him a break, because it was getting to the point that it was interfering with school. And I'm like, he can't come to your school if he can't graduate from high school. Let's add it all up. And so that's when I think it was kind of out of control. There were coaches at his games, at his practices. It was serious. They were pulling him from class. So it just got a little out of control. And I just asked everybody to just give him time to graduate. To finish his school year out. And once the school year was finished, and then that's when we proceeded. But it did he did well for a long time, but it became overwhelming once spring came and they were coming to the school more. Like, so it was coaches that hadn't even offered him coming to the school.
Crazy.
So it was crazy. a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's I feel so bad talking to a lot of the kids at times, to be honest, because it's just like the hectic nature of recruiting can you just get so overwhelming for some kids. So I'm glad that you were able to assist him the best possible way that you could there. Sona, let me ask you, because I know obviously with your background, you are an educator and you still are. And it's actually kind of cool. I know that you are, based upon your profile, you are oh, wait 1 second. Sorry.
Where there's so many offers, you have to decide. You have to make a decision, to make a list, or to say, okay, what are we going to look for in the school? What do we want? What's the expectation? And so we did. That's what we started doing. I have a 14-year-old who's very upfront, is the simple way to put it. So yeah. Drew is, Drew's like, well, they have to run running backs. Like, you can't go to a school and they don't run running backs. Like, so we just got to a point where we had to start, looking at every aspect of it. And then once we kind of decided on the schools that we felt he could thrive in, and the schools that were contacting us, it seemed like they really wanted them, then we had to move on to what was important to Keedron. And so what was important to him is relationship and bonding. And he wanted to be around people that would motivate him. He's like, I don't want to be, in a place where I feel like I'm not being motivated to be better by my teammates. Like, I want to be, that's a teammate that I am, and I want the same thing back. So then it became, where does he feel that he can thrive? Where does he feel comfortable with the people around him? And he's very big on diversity. And so he wanted to go to a school that was diverse. And so those were the things that were important to him.
Well, and I think that's a great lead into the Notre Dame side of the conversation, because obviously they are a very diverse place, right? Like, they have people from all over the place. They have a big brand nationally, and they attract a lot of uniqueness to come to campus. Yes. Let me ask about Notre Dame just in general, maybe from the beginning of when they first started talking to you all and to really start to develop that relationship. What stood out about them? And I guess what has been kind of the lasting message that they've been just kind of that they were hitting home to Keedron before he made his decision?
Okay, so initially you hear Notre Dame and you're like, Notre Dame? He's like, Notre Dame called me, like offered me, and so Coach McCullough from day one was Team Keedron. He loves all that Keedron is and was excited about him. So that was a big deal from day one. He was very much committed to making sure we knew, that I want Keedron, and I feel like he is the player that I need. And so that was important to us as well. And I mean, just looking at his resume, him coaching in the NFL and the things that come along with him. So that was a plus, of course, from the beginning. So Coach McCullough was always a huge plus. We always knew that he was special. And so being coached by him would be something that was, special as well. But we've never wanted to commit early because we didn't want to decommit or, or have like that, I shoulda, woulda, coulda feeling. And so we wanted to wait. But, we always knew that what kind of coach he was and what kind of person he was from conversations with him and all of that. And then as time went on, learning and talking to Notre Dame, the coaching staff, Coach Freeman reaching out to us, holidays, just everybody in there, the way they welcomed us in. And so I think that's what was really inviting to us, especially on the visit. Everybody was just so kind and so supportive of Keedron. And then they had the visit set up so that they were able to be like the offense. It was like an offense visit. And so the other players are players that I'm going to play with. Two of the players were already committed. And so those, in that way, you meet the people that you're going to be around, like the exact people. And so he's bonding with those people. And that's what I think also helped. You can't deny the vibe, the feeling that you get when you're around somebody else. And you can't deny when you're looking for that and it's there. And so that's what he saw. He's like, Mama, I really see myself around these people. Like, this is what I wanted. This is what I see. So that had a major impact on him. The visit and meeting the different people that were there. the support from them, and just seeing the way they present. Notre Dame presents themselves as elite. They're
Yeah.
not just saying, "Oh, do you want to come here? Oh, we really, really want you. This is a great opportunity. You could be so great." They're saying, this is elite. This is another level. Or do you want to accept the challenge? Are you up
Mm-hmm.
for it?
Yeah.
And they present it to you in that way, and that's great because you need to know that. You don't need to go in just like, "Oh, I'm going here." You need to be able to have your mindset on meeting the expectations. And so
Absolutely.
that's something that we talked about. I'm pretty sure he'll tell you that I like say stuff to her. And I'm like, "Oh, yes, this is what I want to do, Mom." And then he had to get like a 30-minute speech from me. But that's why we're here.
That's what
That's why
motherhood's
we're
all
here.
about, though. That's why you're
Because
there.
of the
Exactly.
speeches.
Yeah.
The speeches. So he
Oh,
told me, and I gave him the long, drawn out, this is your legacy. This is your family's, this is not me. This is you.
yeah. Yeah.
Your kids, your grandkids are going to say, "My grandpa, my dad went to Notre Dame." Not me.
Yeah.
I didn't go. So I'm here to
That's a
support
great
you.
point.
But is this what you want your legacy to be? Are you going to finish? And my
Oh, man.
favorite is I'm not picking you up from Notre Dame. So that's
That's so funny. Man, I just got like parenthood, like just like it just
Mhm.
came with me because my kids are young, but my
Oh,
two and a
yes.
half year old girl is so sassy. Like I'll tell her something and I'll explain to her why, and she'll just be like, "No, daddy. Okay, daddy." I'm just like, "You need to listen to me, all right? For the next 18 years at least, we need to have a decent conversation, So I definitely understand the battle there. I would love to hear, though, because you talked about Coach McCullough's relationship, right? And I'm not surprised at all. Everybody I've ever talked to about Coach McCullough is just like, the guy's real, the guy's authentic, he's got great energy, all that stuff. From your perspective, not as much for like how Kedron, I guess, love the relationships, but your ability to talk to Coach Freeman for the first time, to talk to Coach McCullough, what kind of people are they for you? And how they were able to kind of sell it to you as well?
They are, I'll say positive. One thing that I loved about Coach McCullough is that he's a lot like me in that he's going to tell you the truth. So he told us how he runs practices and things and the way that he communicates with them. And it reminded me of myself. Not ever saying, "Oh, you scored 5 touchdowns. Great, you did great. You're awesome. Nobody can touch you." But always finding something to work on, something that you can do to improve. I've told people that before after a game, and they're like, "No, don't do that. He did so great." And I'm like, "Yes, he did. But that's my job. And so we have that understanding, and that's something that Kedron loves. So I'm glad that he has somebody that's going to be there and do that for him, because that's how we've done so far. That's how we are as a family as well. Myself, his brothers, his
Mm-hmm.
sister, we all tell each other straight up, like, "No, that's wrong. That hurt my feelings. Why did you do that?" So I appreciated that about him, him being honest and wanting you to be your best. And
Right.
being your best is not, "I'm my best," and then that's it. It
Sure.
stays. It doesn't remain. Your best is, "What can I do tomorrow to be better?" And so I appreciated that from him. And Coach Freeman is just a breath of fresh air. Cool. He wants to inspire the kids. He wants to show them the kind of man that he is, not just the kind of coach that he is. His kids are always, there. His wife, his family. And so that's what not only Kedron, but all the young men need to see, because like I said, this is their legacy. This is their family. This is what they're going to do for their family. So
Right.
that I really appreciated that from them. And then Coach Dre, add him in there, and he's hilarious and keeps us on our toes. And he same thing, just down to earth, real, and
Yeah.
wanted to give us a great experience, and letting me know that they're going to take care of Kedron.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. Is I can't leave out Dre Brown or Chad Bowden or any of those guys, because they obviously are very important in this process as well.
Yes.
Well, as I wind down here, I would love to hear, if you could, just a little bit about that visits. The official visit going up to Notre Dame, because I know Notre Dame was in a good spot with Kedron before the visit even happens. Like they were in a good spot, right? But you already talked about the impact that visit had to really kind of sell everything, solidify everything. I would love to hear your perspective on being on campus. What was that visit like overall? What was the feeling like? And just kind of being in a place that does have so much history and so much tradition.
The campus was beautiful. Again, shout out to Coach Dre. He did a great job on the tour and explaining everything to us, showing us everything. Just the legacy, like I told him, I think that word just rang out to me. You know, like this is your legacy, like everything that the school has to offer. It felt like home. It felt like a community, like it was small, big enough but small enough, you know, so that you are around like a community of people. The support from other people telling us about how the fans line up. And I know a lot of the things that, you know, schools have, they all have it in their own way. So just the campus itself is beautiful. Just let's just say that. It's just beautiful. But it just felt like home, and it felt like home to Kedron, and that's what mattered the most. You know, it wasn't easy to make the final decision. We bonded with you know, other schools or whatever, and so it wasn't easy to make the final decision. But that's how I know that it was the right decision, and because he made it in spite of, you know, it was difficult for him, but the campus is beautiful. The things that they presented to us, they had presentations, the thoughtfulness that was put into it. There was a moment when the O-line, they did like videos and they included each player and some of their plays from their games. And the kids loved it. All the players loved it because they got to see, oh, you're really good. You know, oh, you're this, you're that. So just the ways that they brought in each player so that they could create that community feeling. And that's what I think was the most important, most impactful, was how it felt like a community. They felt like they were already bonding and they could see themselves with each other.
As a mother, what is the emotions going to be like when he does finally head up to Notre Dame, though? Because we're talking Lufkin, Texas, all the way up to South Bend, Indiana. Obviously, that's a big distance for you. What are just your emotions around that? Like him being so far away from home.
I never want to take away from him any opportunity. So I'm excited for him to go because, like I said, this is his opportunity for him. And I think as a parent, looking at it from that perspective, it helps me, because if I look at it from me, then I probably would want him, like, you know, really close so I could go and see him and siblings. He's the oldest of 4. They love him. His sister is already missing him. He's still here. But I'm excited for him to go. So I'm excited for him to go and to start his life, his to, you know, create his own future and everything. But I know that I'll miss him. But we'll be there. We'll be there. We'll be there. But I'm ready for him to go. I went to college and I left home. I didn't go that far, but I left home. And even when you go 2.5 hours away, you're still away. You know, you have to create your own family, your own friends in a new place. You have to make it home. And so I'm excited for him to go off and make that his home, because I know that's what you have to do that in order for you to be able to finish, to graduate. So I'm excited for him to go. He loves sports. He's an athlete. He loves it from the bottom of his heart. Oh my gosh, he loves it. He loves the fans. He loves that people are there to see him play. He takes that so serious, you wouldn't even understand. I don't get it either, but he takes it very serious. So I'm just excited for him to go and to be able to embrace it all.
My last question for you is, and I think this is from a perspective of a mother, but also from a perspective of an educator a little bit. With the recruiting process now over, him making a decision, he gets to be a kid again for a few more months, right? Which is awesome. Get to enjoy his senior year. How refreshing and how happy are you that he gets to be able to just kind of be a kid for a little bit while longer?
So as soon as the decision was made, and everything, we called all the coach, you know, we did all of that. I let him do it on his own. You could see the weight lifted off of his shoulders, the weight lifted off of my shoulders. And then it got to the point where I was like, how did we ever do this? How did we ever answer? How did we ever communicate with so many people all at once? And so honestly, when you're in the moment, you're doing it because that's what you have to do. You know, You're doing it because you know that's what is for his future. It's what's best for him. It's like now that we look at each other, we're like, can you believe that we were doing that at one point, constantly talking and going? And so, going through it, I guess I'll say you're doing it because that's what you have to do. But now that it's over, it's just everything is more relaxed. He's more relaxed. He's calmed down. Now he's thinking about senior year. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do that. I'm excited about this. Oh, I'll be leaving, Mom. I'll be leaving soon. Can you believe it? So he's really just calmer now, and he's able to relax. He has a really good set of friends. It's 5 of them, and so they've always been around supporting him through it all. And so they've all been hanging out and just really, picking on him. Notre Dame, oh, Notre Dame this, and giving him a hard time. So he's really excited about senior year, about playing football. He's ready, beyond ready. It's Keidron. That's what he does. Yes, he is a lot different. His coach even acknowledged it. He said, Keidron is so much more relaxed. So I'm happy, especially as an educator, like you said, he needed to be able to enjoy his senior year. And I'm glad that he's able to do that.
Yeah, me too, because it goes by way too quick. Way too quick. I mean, honestly, man, I'm 31 now, and I feel like it was just yesterday, and it just went by like that. Like you're a freshman in high school, and you just go in, you're like, oh, all the seniors are telling you like goes by quick, man, and you're just like, yeah, all right, brother, and then
it happens,
Yep, in the blink of an eye. Joined by Sonia Young, the mother of star 2024 running back out of Lufkin, Texas, Keidron Young, of course, Notre Dame commit in the 2024 class. Sonia, I really appreciate this so much. This is incredible insights. I love talking to the kids about their process as well, obviously, but getting the parents' perspective, now me being a parent, I just think it's so unique and so valuable. So thank you so much for joining the podcast today. I really appreciate it and really appreciate the perspective.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. And you start lifting those weights for those girls because they growing up, and you got to be ready for the boys when they coming over, knocking on the door.
The worst decision we ever made was I named my first daughter Juliet, and there's been so many Romeo jokes you just would not believe. I'm just like, I get it. She's gonna date eventually. I get it, but we're just gonna hold off on that for a little bit. But you're right. I need to get back into the gym.
Just keep yourself, keep working out. Be ready.
Yes.
So you can look a little strong.
I do my push-ups at night. I do my sit-ups. I need to start getting back to the free weights, but we'll get there eventually. But thank you again for joining the show. This is fantastic.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
All right, folks. So that was Sonia Young, the mother of 2024 running back Keidron Young out of Lufkin, Texas. Want to thank you all for going through a little bit of a tech issue there. In the middle section, we had a little bit of a StreamYard issue, but hopefully everybody was still able to enjoy the interview. Sonia is a great lady. I've had the ability to talk to her. I was talking to her way before, obviously, we had her on the show about a little over a month ago. But we also have maintained that conversation. Just a really lovely woman. She really is. I think that it gets like super cliche at this point to just call a future mother or father of a Notre Dame football player or a Notre Dame student athlete a great person, but she literally is a great person. Like she just checks in on me once in a while, just see how everything's going, and we kind of check in on one another. So I really appreciate her perspective because I really urge everyone to just kind of get to that moment, right? Because I feel like we talk about a lot these players, what they do on the field, don't do on the field, and kind of everything in between. But I really think that we lose sight of the people aspect of things, like the humanity perspective. And I think that that's the greatest thing about these parent interviews is you can really understand in a very short amount of time why Keidron is the way he is. I think after speaking to Debbie Otting and having her on the podcast, I quickly understood why Joe Otting is a great fit at Notre Dame. I quickly understood why Braylon James is a great fit at Notre Dame after talking to Glenn James, Don Schuler, and all the great parents that we've had the ability. I remember when I was down in San Antonio, I had the chance to talk to Sullivan Absher's father, who another one where you just talk to him and you just you understand why these kids are the way they are. So Sonia Young was able to give me a great perspective, not only into Kedron, his process, but into a mother's process. Like it's not easy. I know we have a lot of mothers that listen to this channel, a lot of people that have been through this moment of kids going off to college and into the real world. I'm not even close to that point in my life personally, but it's not easy. And especially not easy for a young man that is a Texas kid, born and raised, going up to South Bend, Indiana. It's not an easy transition. It's not. So great perspective. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for going through a little bit of that tech issue in between. But really, I just want to send my deepest thanks to you all so much, because I know that these are, some people turn this stuff off immediately that comes on. Like they don't care about this perspective stuff, right? Kind of the nitty gritty, the underlying why people are the way they are. But this is the part that I love so much, and like Jason just said, Kingston William lost his mom. Like, yes, exactly. Like Taliuta was another one where you quickly understand why Kingston ended up picking Notre Dame, even when it didn't seem like it was going to be Notre Dame for a while there. So like button, subscribe to the podcast. We are going to get to our mailbag section next, but I really want to thank you all for joining it. And if you're listening to us on one of your favorite podcast platforms, 5-star reviews are very much appreciated. But that is going to do for this portion of the podcast. Just listen to Sonia Young talk about her son, Kedron. All right, folks, we have a bunch of questions already. I'm going to get through as many mailbag questions as I possibly can. So if you want to, feel free to keep throwing those into the chat. We can work it through. I didn't start, but I know Jason had said something that I wanted to get to. Let me find that question here. Jason, I think at one point had asked just if Kedron was going to be an early enrollee. Yes, that as of right now, the plan is for Kedron to be in Notre Dame in January. So he is planning on early enrolling, graduating from school early, and hopefully making an impact. I mean, he's going to have an opportunity, right? Because there's still going to be a lot of great running backs coming back in 2024. But Audric Estime potentially going pro. There's a natural attrition at the position, both from a transfer perspective. I'm not saying anyone in Notre Dame necessarily is, but like you can, it's a transfer portal era. Injuries happen. So Kedron Young being the physical profile that he brings to the game, I think he'll have a chance to come in and he'll compete for opportunities to play in 2024. So he will be an early enrollee, which, as we know, is always an important aspect of trying to play as a freshman, getting in there early and acclimating to everyday life as a Notre Dame student athlete. We had a bunch of questions from Brian Hockney. I'm going to get to this one first, and we're going to kind of work through some others. Brian says, do you have concerns with Sam Hartman's struggles with NC State in the past? Brian, I think for me, like I would be a lot more, I'd be a lot more concerned about it if Sam Hartman wasn't in a new environment with new players in a sixth-year senior. Because the way I look at it is, so if Sam Hartman was still at Wake Forest and he still had, the same players around him, right, and the same coaching staff, would I worry about NC State defensively a little bit more? Yes, I would, because for me, it's like, what has changed in this scenario, right? Like we talked about insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. In that situation, in that scenario, Sam Hartman would have been on the same school, doing the similar daily routine, around the same players, around the same coaches, in the same system. Notre Dame's just a new environment, a new scenario for him, right? So they're not going to attack NC State the same way that Wake Forest would have attacked NC State. And I also think that you can't discount this. Sam Hartman is a senior, right? He's a six-year player who understands I've had struggles there, but he's also mature, right? He's 24 years old. I think that he's not going to be like one of those. If this was a 20-year-old kid who's had one or two bad outings against NC State coming into the game, I would worry about it a whole lot more. So I think the maturity plays into effect here. And then I also think it's the different situation you're in, right? Like he's not at Wake Forest. He's not around the same players, around the same coaches. This is a new environment. Does he still have to show that he can do it and that he can take the next step? For sure. That's always going to happen. But I really think that I'm just not as worried about it because I just think the situation is going to dictate a different reality, most likely. And also that remains the same as the other side of it, as he's playing it. It's an NC State team, and we'll talk about this a whole lot more this week, obviously, when we get into the breakdowns. But NC State is still breaking in a lot of new defensive players, and they're going to be their second game of the season. Like they lost last year, Drake Thomas. They lost Isaiah Moore. They've lost Tanner Ingle. They lost Corey Durden. They lost a lot of really good football players from this past season. Do they still have good ones? Sure. They have Shaheem Battle. They have Aiden White. They have Peyton Wilson. There's still some good football players to work with. But that defense has lost a lot of players. They didn't get off to the best of starts against UConn. UConn had some early success, and it's only their second game of the season compared to Notre Dame, who's coming in, I think, with a little bit of juice to them, right? A little bit of, they feel good about where they are coming into this one. So I'm not as worried about it. Am I worried about it just on a baseline of NC State's a good defense? Sure. So Harvard needs to come out and play well. There's no doubt about that. But I don't think I'm worried as much because he's had some struggles against NC State in the past. That would only be a bigger worry for me is if he was still on Wake Forest, and he's not anymore. And NC State is a different team than what they were in 2022, 2021. So I feel good about where Sand is. And that's funny, Rob. I just saw you were high school. You went to high school. You played high school with Peyton Wilson's dad. Peyton Wilson's a good football player, man. I really like him from an NFL draft perspective. I hope and I pray the medicals check out because he's had a long history of medicals during his career, even going back to high school. He's torn up like both shoulders. He's had an ACL tear. I feel okay. I love his film. I just hope that he's able to get that medical stuff checked out properly. So I'm not surprised that his dad was good either because he's a good football player, man. He's a really good football player, Peyton Wilson. So, yeah, not too worried about it, though, Brian. I'm not overly worried about it in the sense of I'm worried about it because NC State's a good defense. I'm not worried about it because of what's happened in the past. Next question is going to be from Will Endy. Let me get this one up. There we go. Yeah, here we go. Will Endy says, hey, Ryan, do you think that Brian Kelly's treatment of Jalen Daniels will affect his performance? Well, I mean, look, this is what was so. Let's just have this conversation now. Let's do this now, okay? LSU got absolutely boat raced in the second half last night against Florida State. It was a tough, physical, back and forth football game at halftime. LSU, I believe, was actually winning the football game. I think it was 17-14 at halftime, right? If I remember correctly. And then, obviously, I think Florida State scored 28 straight points. It was 45-17 at one point, and then LSU scored a late touchdown to make it look a little bit more respectful, even though it really wasn't. I mean, they absolutely got manhandled in the second half. I mean, LSU had no answers for Keon Coleman, the transferred wide receiver from Michigan State. Johnny Wilson also had a good football game. Jordan Travis had a lot of nice extension as a football player. Defensively, especially in the second half, Florida State's defensive line started affecting Jaden Daniels, a whole lot more. And I really think that, Florida State flexed their muscles last night, man. They did. Like, Florida State's going to be a good football team. There's not a ton of holes in what Florida State brings to the table. Like, they have an improved offensive line. It's not a stellar offensive line still, but it's a good offensive line. Their running back, Trey Benson's a star. They have now two incredible wide receivers, or I should say one incredible wide receiver, one other very good wide receiver, but two NFL wide receivers. They have a couple really talented tight ends now with Jaheim Bell and Kyle Morlock. They now have a senior quarterback in Jordan Travis. Defensively, they have Jared Verse. They have some really good players on the second level as well, Kalen DeLoach. So I think that Florida State's a scary team. I mean, it's no shame of LSU to have lost that football game, in my opinion. I picked them to lose that football game, but I just picked it in close fashion. How they lost in the second half was embarrassing. I mean, let's just call it what it is. It was absolutely embarrassing. Fortunately for Notre Dame fans, we loved it, right? Because it's so funny last year, guys, for me. Last year, I remember when LSU beat Alabama. Everyone complete national perspective, not Notre Dame perspective, national perspective. We had people come out of the woodworks and be like, "Oh, it was Notre Dame. It wasn't Brian Kelly. It wasn't Brian Kelly's fault they couldn't win big games. It wasn't Brian Kelly at all. It was all Notre Dame." And I think most of us just kind of just said, "Man, you look, it was a good victory for LSU last year, but you beat the worst Alabama team that they've had probably in several years. Like, it wasn't a great Alabama team that LSU beat last year. It wasn't. Outside of that, there were a lot of really not great performances from LSU last year, but I'll give them credit for what Brian Kelly did last year. He got the most out of that football team, in my opinion. The fact that they won 10 games was an incredible coaching job. I just felt like coming into this year, coming into this year, the expectations were a little bit too high. I mean, there's people coming into this year that's just like, it is LSU in the East, and that's it. Nobody else, like Alabama's a far second. I'm just like, come on, man. That's not how that works. It's not how that works. One game against a team that was an underachieving team does not mean that you have arrived. And I think that this game last night really showed that there are still the shortcomings of Brian Kelly and this coaching staff. They came out of the locker room and they weren't ready to play. They weren't. I'll give them credit to first half. Like, they played the tough physical football game. Well, they weren't able to get over the hump against a really good football team. You know, you were number 5 team in the country playing against number 8 team in the country. Yeah, you were away, but especially because you lost to this team last year. If you remember, Florida State came off to a great start last year, and then LSU had to fight back in the second half to make it, to make that a competitive football game down the stretch. This was the complete opposite. They're like competitive first half, and then second half, we're completely going downhill. And the worst part was that there was a lot of self-inflicted things that happened early on in that football game. They passed on 2 field goals in that first half that would have made it at the time 13-7. But so add 6 more points. They would have been up 23-14 at halftime. And that second half probably looks a lot different because now Florida State needs to go about it a completely different way. And I don't know, man. Like, I just felt like there was just I just felt like there were some self-inflicted things in that first half. They still played tough, but ultimately, like, the Jaden Daniels thing, it was the funniest thing to me of this preseason because I think Jaden Daniels is still going to end up being a pretty good football team. I mean, a pretty good football player this year for LSU because he was last year. He was a good football player. Threw like 17 touchdowns, threw for a high percentage, ran for 11. Like, he was a good football player last year for LSU. But the truth that we keep forgetting that is a reality is that Brian Kelly has a long track record of quarterbacks regressing in year 2. We as Notre Dame fans know this, right? We as Notre Dame fans know this, but other people don't know. Other people outside of Notre Dame fandom and the circle don't talk about that enough, right? The fact that, I mean, we've been here, guys. We've been here. We have been here through Everett Golson year 2. We have been here through DeShone Kizer year 2. We have been through Ian Book year 2. For whatever reason, quarterbacks in year 2 under Brian Kelly take a step backward. Don't know why it is. But I'm not here to say, like, put in Doug Musmeyer. I know some people are saying that already. I don't think that that's the answer. I really don't. I mean, could he end up being better than Jaden Daniels? Sure. We maybe could get to there. But as of right now, I mean, it's just not a reality that I would go to. You played against a really good football team last night. You had no second half adjustments. You weren't ready to play. The team had no energy, and you got punched in the mouth. That's what happened. They had no answer for Keon Coleman. I mean, unfortunately for Deuce Chestnut, who transferred from Syracuse, I actually think Deuce Chestnut's a pretty good football player. But, man, he got absolutely worked last night. The cornerback position for LSU last night was not very good. And there were some bad coaching decisions as well because, I mean, I saw a stat this morning. I forget who put it out there. I felt it might have been a PFF guy, Pro Football Focus guy, that had put out that Perkins had only rushed the passer, like Harold Perkins only rushed the passer like 7 times all night and had dropped in the coverage like 38 times. I understand that they're using him more in like an off-ball linebacker role, but man, that guy's your best pass rusher. Like you can't not let him get after the football. Like that's what he does best, right? Like you got to put him on the end man of the line of scrimmage and let him go at some points. So I really think that there was a lot of self-inflicting things. I think LSU will still end up being a solid to good football team this year, but they're not the SEC champion, national title, contender this year like I think people act like they are. I just did. And I've said that months ago. I said that weeks ago. The roster's still building. I think that they're going to be in a solid spot with Brian Kelly ultimately. I do, because I think we could all agree that like Brian Kelly's going to get teams to a they're going to get to a floor of being a good football team. They are, as long as he's connected and they're doing everything around him that they need to do. But I mean, I'm just not going to sit here and be like, yeah, they're going to get to a national championship. And I think that's why Brian had his take last year that a lot of people came. It's so funny. The thing that people got so worked up about when Brian went on Crane and Company last year was where he said that he didn't think that Brian Kelly was going to win a national championship at LSU. He said something like that. And I remember like people came out of the woodwork when they beat Alabama, came out of the woodwork saying stuff like, oh, this guy had no idea what he was talking about. Like they had won championship with him or something like that. I'm like, guys, you didn't prove anything yet. Nothing has been proven. No one ever said that Brian Kelly was a terrible coach. No one, at no point has anyone ever said that. There is a ceiling on Brian Kelly, though. I believe there's a cap on how good he can be at a particular university. I believe that. I truly do. I don't think that he is as innovative or as good a coach that you can just rely on him to consistently win football games on a week-to-week perspective, right? Like, I think that he puts a cap on how good you can be as a football team. But he also brings a good ceiling. Like, he brings a nice ceiling to the table. I mean, a nice floor to the table. A Brian Kelly program, for the most part, is never going to be terrible. They're never going to be terrible. They're going to underachieve, though. No, I didn't mean Tiger Bait, Tyler. I didn't. He was on Brian went on Crane and Company first last year. That went viral, and then Tiger Bait invited him on to talk about his comments. That's kind of a thing that happened last year. But on Crane and Company, they asked him straight up. They said, "Do you think that Brian Kelly is going to win a championship at LSU?" And Brian said, "No, I don't think he is going to, because he's not going to work hard enough." Was basically his, I'm paraphrasing there, but that was kind of the conversation that happened. So yeah, I think that, I'm not, well, I mean, back to your questions. I know I just went on a weird tangent there, right? Is that BK's treatment of Jaden Daniels? Is it going to affect his performance? Him being hard on him and being abrasive with him, is that going to affect his performance? I'm going to say to a degree, but not fully. Like, I don't think Jaden Daniels is going to fully go into the tank, because he's a fifth year player, right? So he's been around the block a little bit. If he was like a sophomore or even a true junior, I might think that it would have more of an effect, because he's still a younger player that's still kind of getting his grips and the reality. But I really don't think that it's going to be like the worst, like the end all be all of the be all end all. Excuse me. I know I always say it backwards and people get upset about it. So I think it will have like a slight effect probably, but I don't think that it's going to be like the end all for him, because I still think that I still think that he's a good player, and he's been around the block for a while. Like, he's been a kid that's transferred. He's had ups and downs at Arizona State. He had ups and downs his first year at LSU, and he ended up with a lot more ups than downs. So I think he'll be fine. I think LSU will be fine. But I've always sold the national championship thing. And again, it doesn't mean that it's over. If LSU runs the table and gets the SEC championship game and does their thing, this could be a moot point at that point. But I think that just showed a little bit of the kinks in the armor. The secondary is not great for LSU this year. It's not. They're depending on Deuce Chestnut, who I actually think is a decent player, but again, it's not like typical LSU corner standards. And then the other one is Zy Alexander, who's an FCS transfer. And I think he'll be an okay football player, but I think you're depending on a lot of moving parts in his secondary this year, which I don't think is going to be great. I don't love the second level of the defense because I actually think that this is the funny part. It's like I think that Harold Perkins was misused last night, but I also do think it's a little bit out of necessity because they got Omar Spates in from Oregon State. Like he's fine. He's a solid linebacker, but he's nothing special. Like they're struggling a little bit on the second level. They lost a couple good linebackers from last year, including Micah Baskerville, who's a pretty good player who's in the NFL now. So I just think that they don't have the dudes on the second level right now, which I think is going to take away from the first level because they're going to think that they have to use Harold Perkins a ton more on the second level. Secondary is not great. LSU's offensive line, I think, is solid, but I think you saw like Emory Jones didn't have a great game at right tackle last night. The interior was okay, nothing special. And I think running back is good, but like I don't think it's great either. I think it was like incredibly up and down last night. And then secondary pass catchers, I think, are actually not incredible. Like they have a really good player, Malik Neighbors, but the Lacey kid, I think, struggled last night. Brian Thomas had a late, long touchdown to pull it to 24. But before that, I mean, it's like a 75-yard touchdown. He ended with 140 yards. It's like, yeah, dude, you had 70 yards before that. It wasn't like you were killing it. But yeah. Great question, though, man. And Will ND, thank you for the question. Sorry, folks, for going off on a little bit of a tangent. I did have a lot. I watched that game from start to finish, and I had a lot of thoughts on it last night. There's no doubt. Brian Hockney had a question. He says, how do you think Peanut Butter and Jelly played Saturday? Do you think Minchie should have played a little bit more? I don't know about a little bit more, Brian. I mean, if Steve Angeli if he's the backup quarterback, the main backup, then I think that he needed to play a decent amount. So, I mean, he ended up having good stats. I think he was like 9 of 11 with 2 touchdown passes, right? Like, or 8 of 11, something like that. Like, it was a good performance from a production perspective. I think that things were pretty easy for him for the most part. Like, I don't think there was anything that was strenuous on Angeli, right? Like a couple running back long gains. There was just some easy kind of, shallow stuff in that football game. He looked fine though. I mean, fine. Like I wouldn't say he looked great. I wouldn't say he looked superb. I mean, but he was a passable, solid quarterback. Luckily for Notre Dame is that they have some dudes in space that can create a lot of plays. And that's what I saw from Angeli. So I think that he needed to play. I was happy to see him play a decent amount of games. I would just say for me that I mean, because I think ultimately, if I remember correctly, I think Kenny Minchie ended up throwing 2 passes in that football game. I think that's like pretty much a perfect result. I mean, so Angeli ended up throwing 11 passes. Kenny Minchie had 2 passes, and then Sam Hartman only played the first half. I think that was a pretty ideal scenario that happened there, honestly. So I think Angeli played fine. Just nothing was hard. Like that's the difference between being a good quarterback and a great quarterback. Good quarterbacks, they can make the easy stuff work, right? You can keep things on schedule. You don't hurt yourself. You don't make bad decisions. I think Steve brings that to the table. My question is, can Steve make the hard things, right? Can he make those things happen when things aren't perfect, when you're getting pressured, when there's a broken play, when there's a blitz that you didn't see coming pre-snap and you have to make an adjustment post-snap? Like those are the questions I have about Steve, not the easy stuff. Can he make the hard stuff easier? It was a good step though. He got playing time, looked pretty good in the process, I thought. So I liked what I saw from Steve for the most part. We had, I have to say this on podcast. We have a chat from Sexy Man. What's up, Sexy Man? How much is it helping us in recruiting that these recruits are seeing our freshmen getting substantial playing time? Oh, I think it's massive. I think it is. Yeah. I think that wide receiver right now, I think it's, I mean, showing that you can get, because I mean, Rico Flores was playing a lot early and he had a couple early catches, if I remember correctly. I know he definitely had one early catch, but you have you had the wide receivers playing ball early, which I think helps wide receiver recruiting. Running back, we've talked about that last week, seeing a 5-headed running back, basically getting a lot of playing time. You saw also on Saturday some of the defensive players that we were waiting for play, like Jay Nosbury played a good amount. Preston Zinter had a tackle in this football game. Brendan Vernon played. We've seen Christian Gray play already in this season. We have seen Drake Bowen play a little bit in this season. We saw We even saw Cooper Flanagan get in this football game. We've seen Kenny Minchie play. So yeah, I think that getting those, because that's one thing that we missed last year. I think Notre Dame blew a couple blowout opportunities last year to get some of these young players in the game early. And I think that doesn't help recruiting at all, because I mean, even as a freshman, you have the 4 games, so like you still want to play, right? Like you still want to get that game time experience in some capacity. And I think that you can't discount it. For me, the fact that you're seeing a lot of freshmen play, which I think is going to be big, not only for the Notre Dame football team development wise, but also for recruiting. Seeing guys like Rico Flores and Jaden Greathouse and Jeremiah Love and all those guys do their thing on the football field, I think is incredibly beneficial, because it's now easy to sell to the Cam Williams of the world. It's not a great example because Cam's been committed to Notre Dame for a long time, but to show Cam like, hey man, if you come in and you're a dude, you're going to play. Like at the end of the day, you're going to play football if you can play at this level. So I think it's a really beneficial, sexy man. And I can't believe I had to say sexy man on the podcast 4 times, but there it is. Thank you all though. Appreciate it. We had another question from RJ.G. Irving. Does the Navy defense prep of containing quarterback keepers and options help to prep for NC State? I mean, I think there's like some intricacies that help there, right? I think there's some intricacies to defeating a defense that will always help in that regard, man. Like, because there's going to be different pressure packages. There's going to be different things that a team's going to do to, stop Sam Hartman from winning outside of structure and to make things difficult. So I think there's things that carry over week to week, to be honest with you. But ultimately, I would say that this is a completely different challenge, and it doesn't help you a lot. I think having 2 games under your belt is a beneficiary for sure, but the Navy defense is a lot different as kind of that 4-2-5 haphazard system than what you're going to see against NC State. That's going to run like a 3-3-5 and be incredibly disruptive. Like they're going to rely on their second level defenders and their defensive backs to play a lot of man coverage this week. That's what they're going to do, because that's what NC State does. Navy does not live like that necessarily. Navy wants to create a lot of disruption at the line of scrimmage, not necessarily with the second level. Colin Ramos and David Harbour were more guys to clean things up, right? Like you want to make your defensive linemen create a bunch of havoc, and then like your rover position to be, or what do they call it? Their striker. You want their striker to make a lot of plays. So I think that fundamentally it's just a very different defense, and you're talking about a completely different level of athletes. I mean, I just talked about Peyton Wilson a little bit earlier in this podcast. Peyton Wilson, I mean, all due respect to Colin Ramos and Harbour, like they're not Peyton Wilson. Peyton Wilson's 6'4", 240 pounds and can run, a former top 50 recruit. Like he's a different type of athlete than what you saw against Navy. So I think there's some carryover just from like the fundamental perspective, but the defense in general doesn't really prepare you mostly in that sense. But it's a great question. Very, very great question. We had another question from Mike Ho or Huff. Mike, put it in the chat. Is it Ho or Huff? Tell me how you pronounce it. But Mike says, special teams have taken a step back. Do you agree, Ryan? Some parts of it. Well, actually, no. Let me take that back. Let me think about it. Let me rephrase this for a second. I think there's some parts that I still have major question marks on, but I wouldn't say fundamentally overall they've taken a step back. Because the way I think of it is, Notre Dame just blocked a kick for the first time since 2021. I mean, I love Brian Mason, but the field goal block team didn't have a huge impact last year. We haven't seen a pump block, but I mean, also it doesn't seem like Notre Dame's been as aggressive. I think that for me, there are areas that Notre Dame definitely needs to get better at. But there were areas that Notre Dame needs to get better at last year that I think are still kind of a carryover. Notre Dame needs to be a better kickoff return team. They're not good at it right now. They're not. The first game was not great. The second game was also not great, and there was a fumble on a kickoff. So I think that the kickoff return unit needs to be better. I think it's just too much. It's too little of a sample size to tell you how good punting and kicking is overall. I mean, you had one kick in the first game, which obviously Spencer Schrader missed, but then we haven't seen him since, as far as from a field goal perspective. Excuse me. You saw Bryce McPherson a little bit, but like he's now 2 punts on the season. So I would say let's evaluate that a little bit later, Mike. But I think that honestly, like the biggest area that needs to get better for Notre Dame is Notre Dame needs to be a better kickoff return team. They need to be. Because it's awesome right now that Sam Hartman has led 11 touchdown drives in 11 touchdowns in 12 drives, and there's been a lot of longer drives. But when you start getting into the Ohio States, the USCs, the Clemsons of the world, the better team, the NC States even to a degree, you need to play better. Well, you need to play with better field position consistently. Like you can't start every drive at the 17 to 23 yard line, which is pretty much where Notre Dame has been stuck from a kickoff return team. So I really think the kickoff return especially needs to get better. It needs to get better. And then let's evaluate the field goal, the punting team in a couple of weeks when we just have a little bit more of a sample size. There's just not a ton to go off of right now from that. All right, I'm going to roll through a bunch of these because we're already over 2 hours and I have not even made a dent in these questions. So let's get some of these ones that are kind of quicker ones out real quick. Florida Irishman said, any update on Gerby Lambert? The silence is deafening. So I still think, first and foremost, and I understand it's Gerby Lambert, star offensive lineman out of Catholic Memorial in West Roxbury, Massachusetts. Get asked about this every week. And Florida Irishman, I 100% understand why I'm asked it. But I get asked here, get asked on my message board. If you don't hear any updates, that means that things are just the same, right? Is that Notre Dame's in a really good position. It's just about when Gerby Lambert wants to make that decision, right? Like, that's where we are. I have originally said, and I still kind of believe it, that he's going to make a decision before his first game. But now his first game is on Friday, right? So the senior season's about to start. I ultimately just think it's going to end at some point here soon. We just don't have clarity as far as when exactly it's going to happen. But Notre Dame is in a really good position. I understand why it's frustrating to just kind of sit back and wait, but there's just no big update on Gerby. Like it's when he wants to make a decision. That's just where we are. And unfortunately, doesn't tell media that type of stuff really. So, I mean, we're just kind of wait and see mode, but Notre Dame is in a really good spot with Gerby Lambert. Next question we had was from Joe Alt Deletes. That's a fantastic name, by the way. Said, do you know if Notre Dame would take Bear commitments on his upcoming visit if he decided to commit or hold on to Deuce Knight to decide? It's a great question. As of today, I don't think that Bear Bachmeier is necessarily in a commit mode right now. Like, I don't think that he's going to commit I don't think he's going to come to the Central Michigan game, have a great time, which I'm sure he will, and then want to commit on the spot. I think that this is just one that's going to play out a little bit longer than that. There is no debate that Deuce Knight is the top quarterback on Notre Dame's board. I do think that they'll see that one through ultimately. So I think it's kind of a moot point to me, to be honest with y'all. Like, if I don't know the answer to your question because I just don't think that's how it's going to work out ultimately. I don't know exactly what that conversation would look like. I think that Notre Dame would be incredibly happy with Bear Bachmeier as their quarterback if Deuce Knight chooses to go somewhere else. But I do think that they intend to see the Deuce Knight commitment through, and I don't anticipate Bear Bachmeier making a decision anytime soon, or as far as the next couple weeks. Like, I don't think that Central Michigan is going to be the game that he says, yeah, I'm on board. I just don't think that's the timeline right now. So I just don't think it's going to end up mattering. Sounds like a little bit of a cop-out, but I just don't think that the timelines are going to mesh and it's not going to be a concern for me. All right, let's go to make sure I'm getting all these super chats. Jacob Mears, I'm going to take yours off real quick because you also asked about Gerby's season starts Friday. Will you expect a commitment for the season? I still do, but I guess that could change. We'll see what happens. But it's a great question. Brian Hockney had another question who said, Ryan, I saw your comment that Bryce Young has potential to be a top 50 player in 2024. Where do you rank him currently? So, Brian, I have not re-ranked Bryce Young as of now because I like to have just a little bit more of a sample size than that. I don't think that for me, like, I don't like to just be super impulsive and to look at it. I just don't like to be impulsive and just make a decision based upon like one game, 2 games. Like, that's just not my style, right? So he's now played 3 football games. About mid-season, I think I'll take a deeper dive into Bryce and really kind of get a little bit of an updated perspective on him. Coming into the year, like I had him as a top 250 kid, 4-star, but like that 4-star was very much based upon upside. It was. Tangibly, he's probably a high 3-star based upon his junior film, in my opinion. But I do think, to your question, I do believe that Bryce Young is playing like a top 50 football player through 3 games. I do. And I look at him as a 6'5", 240 plus pounds defensive lineman with explosiveness, change of direction ability. He's got all the tools to be that type of kid. If what we've seen in the 3-game stretch becomes the entire season for Bryce Young, I think he'll be a for sure top 100 player by every platform pretty much. But I think that he could be a top 50 kid. I do. Because I just don't think there's just not a lot of guys that look like him body type wise and move like him. There's just not a lot of them. So I think he's got some rare ability to him. So if he's able to really make that last over a full season, I think he'd be a top 50 kid. But as of my most recent evaluation of him, he was a top 250 kid based upon upside almost solely and coming into the season. I have not re-ranked him yet, but that will probably happen somewhere around mid-season. We had another question. Great question, Brian. Thank you so much. David Cook says, is there any concern that them spreading the ball around to so many receivers and the slow start to Tobias Merriweather may turn out to off the top-rated wide receivers or hinder the wide receiver recruiting at all? I don't think so, because ultimately I think that, one, there's like 2 outlooks on this one for me, David. One is the short-term versus long-term. Short-term, I think a recruit is going to look at this opportunity that younger receivers are getting. Tobias is playing a lot. He's one. Jaden Thomas is still just a junior. Deion Coles is playing. But then the freshmen, right? The Jaden Greathouses, the Rico Flores. Notre Dame has surely shown over the first 2 weeks that if you're a talented player at wide receiver, you're going to get an opportunity to play. You're going to get an opportunity. So I think that that's going to help the short term. The long-term aspects is still working itself out a little bit, but I've been impressed with what I've seen from Jaden Thomas as far as talent perspective. I think he's looked very good. I think that Chris Tyree has looked good for what his role has been in the offense. Jaden Greathouse has looked very good early on. So, yeah, Tobias hasn't gotten off to a great start over the first 2 games. There's still time to fix that. But ultimately, short term, they're answering every question I think that some of the wide receivers on the board or wide receivers that Notre Dame will recruit need answered for early playing time. The next step is to show that you can now turn those guys into substantial players, right? Not just good football players, the very good football players, but to pros. If they can do that, then the Ryan Wingos of the world, like that caliber of player, they'll give Notre Dame a much more serious look, and be able to, I think Notre Dame will be able to close on those types of guys. So I don't think necessarily it hurts them right now. I think the only way that it'll hurt them is if they can't develop any of the wide receivers into legitimate NFL players, which I would just find hard to believe. Like process of elimination, law of averages. I think Notre Dame's heading in a great direction. So I think I don't think there is really a downside to what we're seeing from wide receiver right now, but we'll see as it continues to develop long term. We had Charlie Weiss's last belt loop, who had a question. He said, do you think there is better talent available than Austin? It's talking about Austin Alexander, or is recruiting not going well at D-line so far? Charlie, Charlie, I think it's a reasonable question. I think Austin Alexander is a kid that's rising up the recruiting rankings, right? Like he's a top 200 kid by at least one platform now. He's getting a very nice offer list at this point. I just think he's a player that's impressed Notre Dame. I don't think this is a panic move at all. Like I don't think it's a panic move. Defensive line, I actually like where Notre Dame is with a couple strong side defensive ends. I think the one position that I have questions about right now is Viper. Like, is there a Viper on the board that I feel good about? Not necessarily. Like, I mean, I hope Notre Dame continues to push for guys like Bryce Davis, right? But I wouldn't say that they're in a tremendous position with any one Viper as of today. So I think this is more just you've evaluated a player that has now developed and is continuing to develop. And I think Austin Alexander is very talented. I do. And I think that getting on him is not a bad thing at all. So we're not, it's not like a panic mode move of like, oh, we can't get any traction. Cause you have to remember, like these kids are just playing their junior year of high school. It's not like, it's not like signing day is 4 months away. You know what I mean? Like you still have or 3 months away. Like you still have a lot of time here. So I don't think it's a panic move. I just think Notre Dame really likes Austin Alexander for what he's put on film so far as a junior in this offseason. It's a good question though, Charlie. Good question. But overarching, defensive tackle recruiting, I think, is going just fine. It's going well in 2025. I think strong side defensive end recruiting is going well. Field end. I think boundary end is the one spot that I have a little bit of question mark. So I have no problem with Austin Alexander getting added to that board. We had a question from T Guns who said, Rob, if something happened and you absolutely just had to move to one of the following states, which one would you choose and why? Oh, man. North Carolina, Georgia, Texas, or Alaska? Oh, it's an easy one, Tommy. Easy one. I've actually already talked to my wife about hopefully someday moving to North Carolina. I would love to move to one of the Carolinas. Would love to. North Carolina, especially, I think it's beautiful. I love that there's still seasonality to it, but it's mostly very beautiful for a large portion of the year, and it's still within a few hours of New Jersey, so I can still get back home to see my parents if they're still living in Jersey at that point. So North Carolina would be an easy one for me. I've never wanted to live in Georgia or Texas. Like I go to Texas every year for the College Ground Showcase, which I scout for, and Texas is fine. I went down to San Antonio last year. Like San Antonio, it was nice. Alaska is a place that I want to visit. I want to go to Denali National Park in Alaska, but I've never wanted to live in Alaska full time. That doesn't sound like a great time for me. So yeah, North Carolina though, would 100% love to live at. There's no doubts. Next question is from Joe Medina. Says, Mailbag, I only asked this because of how hard Notre Dame went after him, but did you hear about Micah Tease's arrest? Did he have character issues in high school? Joe, no. I mean, I'm just want to comment for what I know of Micah Tease, because I was able to talk to Micah Tease a few times before he originally committed to Arkansas and then eventually flipped to Texas A&M. Seemed like a really good kid to me. I mean, I never heard anything about like character issues. We know that he was the reason that he had trended away from Notre Dame to like Arkansas and then Texas A&M is like NIL stuff, right? Like, I mean, so he was a kid that valued like the financial side of things, which is totally fine. But no, I never got any vibes of like, he was always a respectful kid to me. And I had never heard anything as far as like him being a bad person. So, anytime stuff, happens, it's unfortunate, but no, nothing from my handling ever said Micah Tease was a bad kid. So yeah, unfortunate, but nothing bad there from my perspective anyway. Obviously I don't see the kid every single day, so I have a limited kind of sample size of who he is as a person. All right, next question we had here was from Bobby S. Still think we have a need at wide receiver and cornerback in this class. Any names we may be looking at? I mean, cornerback's an easy one. Caleb Beasley's still a guy that Notre Dame's recruiting, the cornerback in 2024 out of the state of Tennessee. We'll see if Notre Dame can get him to take an official visit this season. If they can, then there's a little bit of a chance. I just don't think it's incredibly likely. But I think Notre Dame really likes where they are with their two corners. Leonard Moore is a guy that we're very high on. I think that he's a tremendous football player. Carson Hobbs has had a pretty good start to his senior season as well. So, let's see where he continues to develop. Wide receiver is an interesting one. I think that Notre Dame will be active in wide receiver recruiting. No names that I can necessarily put out into the universe as of now, but there's definitely some activity there. But I think ultimately, if Notre Dame ended up with a three-man class of Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, and Logan Saldate, I think they would be head over heels with that class. But you always want to acquire more and more talent, which I think Notre Dame will be interested in doing, Bobby. But it's not necessarily one where I think it's like a make it or break it type of situation. We had another question from Michael who said, do we have a comp for Bryce Young? I actually do have a comp for Bryce Young. I do. I think that so a guy that popped to my mind immediately when I watched him on film first week was Ezekiel Ansah that played at BYU. He was drafted in the first rounds by the Detroit Lions. Ziggy ended up being 6'5 plus, incredibly long arms, like 275 pounds, I think was what he was when he was coming out of BYU. He was also a little bit of a late bloomer, a kid that I think he was a walk-on originally at BYU, if I remember correctly. But I think that there's some parallels because Ziggy's long, explosive, moves really well for his size, but there was still he's a little bit of a late bloomer. And I think that Bryce kind of has a similar skill set to him. He's more of a linear player, but they can also bend the outside track to a decent degree for a guy his size. So Ziggy Ansah would be a guy that would pop to my mind for Bryce Young. If anybody else has a better comp, please feel free to throw them in the chat. We also had a question from Bobby S. Gaines. Are we still recruiting Carter Nelson and the decommit that went to Georgia Tech? Decommit, of course, he's talking about Carter Nelson, who committed to Nebraska, tight end out of Ainsworth, Nebraska. And then we're talking about Isaiah Canyon out of Georgia that committed to Georgia Tech after decommitting. I think there's very little to no communication with Isaiah Canyon. I just don't think that that's one that's going to happen. He just didn't want to come up to his family didn't want him to come and leave the state of Georgia, apparently. So that's just a moot point at this point. Carter Nelson, I believe there's some contact with, but I don't know if that's one that I feel great about. But we'll see if things keep trending. If Notre Dame has a great season, Nebraska has an up and down one. Is it possible? Sure, but I think it's unlikely at this point. But I do think there is some conversation there, but I don't think there's any with Isaiah Canyon, to my knowledge. All right, next question's from Jason Smith, who says, does missing the second half for guys like Teddy Rizek and Kennedy Urlacher stifle some of their development for missing reps? I mean, Jason, to a degree, yeah. I mean, it does. I mean, would I like Kennedy Urlacher and Teddy Rizek to have complete games of reps? For sure. I mean, unfortunately, it's just they both play on good football teams, right? I mean, especially Teddy. I mean, Teddy, their team has won back-to-back championships. So I really think that for me, like it's stifling to a degree, but it's obviously out of their control a little bit, right? Yeah, and which is kind of unfortunate, but that's why I think the full scope of the whole full season, like I'm not going to learn anything out of Teddy Rizek from this past week that is going to make me think fundamentally different about him. At the end of the season, when you have all those reps up together, that's when you can really make a thorough evaluation, in my opinion, right? So yeah, I mean, it is a little stunting for the short term, but I think long term, you're still going to get more than enough reps this season to take a step forward. So I'm excited to see where they are as football players at the end, because there's foundational physical traits to like about each one of those players, but obviously neither has put it together necessarily yet. Let's roll through a few more of these quickly. Bobby S., over under 1.5 commits in September between 2024 and 2025 class. I will go September. Public, I'll say under 1. If we're talking about kids that silently commit, then I'll go over the 1.5. But I'll say under 1.5 for public commitments in September. Under. We had another question from James Ingalls, said, do you know if we're going to have Justin Scott on campus for a visit for Ohio State weekend? I think Notre Dame's still trying to make it happen, James. I just wouldn't hold my breath on it. I mean, I've said this on the board and on this podcast before. Like, I don't think Justin Scott's I just don't think it's a reality that's going to be even in play or an opportunity that's going to happen ultimately. Like, I just don't. I would just, if I was a Notre Dame fan, I would just try to get Justin Scott out of my mind. I just don't think that's going to happen ultimately. We'll see if they're able to get him on campus. Even if they do, though, at this point, like, I'm just kind of like, even if they get him on campus, I'm not sure that they're a serious contender for him. Just not. I don't know. So yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath is all I'll leave it with on that one. We had a question from Bobby S., who said, any concern with Justin Thurman's lack of productivity so far? No, we're 2 games in. No. I mean, he scored a touchdown this past week. I mean, would I've liked him to have run for 200 yards this past week? Sure. Especially a kid that hasn't touched the ball a ton in his high school career so far. But no, I mean, Bobby, if I'm sitting at the end of the year and Justin Thurman doesn't have like any production all year, then like, yeah, I'll be concerned at that point. But no, I'm not going to jump off the ledge after 2 games. Not me personally. Andrew Gilmore says, what is your evaluation of Kyle McCord after week 1? Did you get a chance to evaluate their offensive line? I didn't watch their offensive line. I watched a decent amount of their game, just kind of watching it. I thought that there was a lot of struggles there, to be honest with you. Like, I thought the accuracy was very spotty. I think there was a couple bad decisions. It's a first game, so I'm not going to go over the top on it. But I know I have an Ohio State buddy friend who's texted me. It was like, "Yeah, I'm done with Cal McCord." So I don't. Obviously, he's frustrated and hyperbolic with it because it wasn't the best performance of all time. But certainly a lot to be desired after week one. But he has time to right that ship even before he sees Notre Dame. So we'll see. But it wasn't a great start for Kyle, to the question. We had a question, another one from Bobby Yes, who said, Price has more talent than Young. Jadarian Price has more talent than Kedron Young. In my opinion, Young looks more like Tony Jones than Audric to me. Man, I don't look, Bobby, right here. Okay, this is where we're going to agree and disagree on a couple things here. One, I think Kedron's a little bit more talented as an all-around football player when you took the size, athleticism, all that into perspective. Jadarian Price is more explosive than Kedron Young. Jadarian Price is also 15 to 20 pounds less than Kedron Young. I mean, that's started off, right? But ultimately, Jadarian Price is really talented. So if your take is that Jadarian Price is more talented than Kedron Young, that's your style of player. Cool. That's fine. I don't agree with that necessarily. I think Kedron's more talented, which is fine. The comp to Tony Jones, though, that I don't see that one at all. I don't see it at all. The biggest things about Tony Jones was a physical player, ran hard, decent hands for his size, but had no explosiveness. That was Tony. And Tony's still figured out how to stick around in the NFL for a couple years. So, like, no shot at Tony Jones at all. But stylistically, I don't see a comparison at all there. I think Kedron Young is so much more explosive than what Tony Jones ever was at Notre Dame or at IMG Academy before that. Like, I don't see that comp at all. I think that I personally just think that Kedron Young is a much different athlete than Tony Jones. Tony Jones was a good football player. Tough, physical kid, pretty good hands out of the backfield. But I think that he was just a kind of a below average athlete, which I thought was kind of where there was limitations on him. Kedron Young, I don't think has any athletic limitations. So that's kind of where I am with that one. But it's a great question. Great question. We had another question. I want to get this one real quick. Tristan Guest just said, quick question, not about recruiting. Why is Jadarian Price not playing much? He looks really good. Tristan, I think this was kind of always load management to begin the year. I mean, he's coming off an Achilles injury. You have a really deep running back rotation, obviously, with Audric Estime and Jeremiah Love and Jabron Payne and Devin Ford. So, like, I didn't expect him to play, like, a ton of snaps the first couple games. I think that you are going to see more and more Jadarian Price as you get deeper into the season. That's kind of the way I think of it. I just didn't think that they were ever going to rush him and just like give him full workload, right? Like, I just didn't necessarily see that. So I think it's a little bit of load management. I also think it's sharing the backfield with a lot of good running backs. That's kind of what I would parlay it to. We had a question from Andrew Manzano, hashtag MOB. His question was, do you think the reason why Notre Dame struggles getting the top 5-star or high 4-star quarterbacks is because the coordinators the past years are so stuck in using a pro style? No. I mean, have they struggled getting quarterbacks? I mean, Anthony, I think I said Andrew originally. My apologies. Anthony Manzano, my deepest apologies there. I mean, Kenny Minchie was rated as a top 100 kid by at least one platform. He was a high 4-star by several people. Brian had him as I think number 80 player or so. But I mean, CJ Carr is a 5-star. I don't care where he's ranked by anybody. Like, he's one of the top 3 to 4 quarterbacks in the 2024 class, in my opinion. And if Notre Dame's able to get Deuce Knight in 2025, I don't think this statement sticks there at all. I mean, the pro style. I actually think that pro style is very. I think ultimately players want to win and they want to produce, right? Like, that's kind of the baseline. But also the pro style element, I think, is like super overplayed a little bit because one, pro style is such a generic term because pro football changes so rapidly. I mean, there's a lot of spread concepts now in the NFL nowadays. Like, not everything's a pro style under center. Like, that's just not kind of how the game's played anymore. It's still there, but it's not like the standard as much as it used to be. But also, like, it's really easy if I'm a Notre Dame coach, if I'm Gino Guidugli or if I'm Jared Parker, it's like, dude, like our if you want to look at our offense, watch our offense and then go watch the NFL. And there's a lot of carryover there. So it's actually going to prepare you for the NFL a ton. But again, like I don't necessarily accept the premise because I really think that Notre Dame has had no problem recruiting quarterbacks. I think there were maybe some decisions that were made on a couple quarterbacks that shouldn't have been made, but I don't think that's necessarily a fault of actually the recruiting. I think it's a fault of the recruiters, if that makes sense, right? I mean, you still got Kenny Minchey and CJ Carr in back-to-back classes here, and then you have a chance to get an absolute stud in Deuce Knight, or I'm gonna say the secondary prize. But like, if Notre Dame gets Bear Bachmeyer is considered a top 100 recruit by 2 different platforms. Like, he's a really good player, right? Like, he's really good. So I think Notre Dame quarterback recruiting is just fine. I think it's going to be very good moving forward. All right, let's get to another question here. This one's from Eric Santini, who said, Ryan, don't you think that the lack of play at LSU is due to them going to get kids from the portal and not getting the kids they use and developing them to be dogs? Lack of play. Wait, let me read that question one more time. I'm not quite following it, Eric, my apologies. Ryan, don't you think that the lack of play at LSU is due to them going get kids from the portal? So I guess this is a question of like the portal versus high school recruiting. That's how kind of I'm taking this. I mean, ultimately, is it going to hurt high school recruiting? I mean, possibly, but like, I don't blame LSU for how they've gone about restocking that roster because that roster was barren, right? Like I really think that that LSU specifically, they had like 36 scholarship players, I think, when Brian Kelly got there. So like they needed to fill in gaps quickly. So I think that'll right itself. LSU, I think, is always going to be a player with foundationally like get into the transfer portal. But I think as the roster gets regulated a little bit, Eric, I think that it will become less and less of like a priority to get those transfer portal players because there will be more opportunities to get freshman playing time. So yeah, I think that it's just about regulating that roster that was in a bad situation from the previous regime. We had Andrew Gilmore with a question who just said we had back-to-back from him. Thoughts on Travis Hunter? Is he the Shohei Ohtani of football? Ohtani, of course, is the pitcher / designated hitter for Los Angeles Angels. Travis Hunter is a ridiculous athlete. He had interception. I think he had over 100 yards receiving. I mean, he's one of those rare football players, man. I am curious to see how they manage his snaps, though, because I think he played like 110 snaps this past week, which is like, that's crazy, right? But yeah, I mean, he's a multifaceted athlete that can do a little bit of everything. So if that's where you're going with it, sure, I can see that, right? But I think that they're going to need to manage his snaps a little bit because, like, he's playing like 110 plus snaps this past week, I think. That's great and all, but like, is he going to be able to do that every single week? Like, that's a lot, man. That's a lot. So I'm interested to see how his niche really kind of develops moving forward, but we shall see. All right. We had 2 more, and I'll check the chat to see if there's anything more. Andrew Gilmore says, is the veer and shoot the best offense in college football? Tennessee and Colorado are completely changing their fortunes largely from running this offense. I mean, so the Tennessee Colorado offense, and of course, that's Sean Lewis is the offensive coordinator for Colorado, and then Tennessee, Josh Heupel. There's air raid principles in this. I mean, I wouldn't say it's changing. I would say that I think that football is very cyclical, right? Like I do, Andrew. I think that the game's going to become really wide open until there's a team that says, like, now we're going to reduce everything. And then it's going to be kind of like, it's a copycat league, right? So as of right now, like those types of offenses are changing football for now. But is it sustainable long term? I don't know because, again, like there's going to be a game this year, guys. I know everyone's like super excited about Colorado. I get it. Like they just had a tremendous game against TCU where they came back and they looked really good in the second half, especially. A lot of speed on that team. But is it sustainable when you get into a little bit more of a dogfight and teams kind of condense you a little bit? Because it's easy to say you're going to spread everybody out until you kind of get punched in the mouth a little bit, and then teams just don't respect it as much. So I mean, it helps the short term, but I think sustainability long term is my question there. James Ingalls had a question. He said, to piggyback off the special teams topic, is there any talk about getting Micah Bell a shot at kick returner? That's more of a question for Brian, James. I don't know if the conversation has come up. I mean, I would honestly, folks, like I would keep all my options open from a kick return perspective because it hasn't been good enough the first 2 weeks. It hasn't, right? Obviously, that position group has, and it's not just the kick return in general, as far as the kick returner. I also think, James, that like blocking hasn't been good enough, right? Like blocking, decision making, and kickoff returner have not been good enough so far over the first couple weeks. So that needs to get better. I think it can. But like, yeah, would I consider guys like Jeremiah Love still, Micah Bell? I would keep it an open competition at kick returner. Like you haven't seen good enough stuff to begin the year where it's just like, nope, that's a foregone conclusion. Like, nah, man, that's not how that works. Like everything should be a competition if a position group or a spot is not living up to expectation. Notre Dame has to get better at being at kickoff returns. They have to. Because again, I said it before, but like there's going to be some games where they are a little bit more of a grinded out type of feel to the game, where field position is going to be a much more, it's going to be a bigger topic of that football game. Hasn't mattered too much right now because Notre Dame offensively is just clicking. They are. But when the game gets a little tougher, it would be awesome to start a drive at the 35 or 40 or on the other side of the 50 occasionally. Like that would be great, right? So I think that it will matter more. But yeah, so I think that there's an evaluation process that needs to take place. There's no doubt about that. All right, I think that's where we're going to end it today. I want to thank everybody before you leave. Thank you all so much. I know there's a little bit of technical difficulties in the first section, but I want to thank you all so much for sticking with me here. We talked not only to Sona Young earlier, the mother of Keedron Young, we also talked about the commits recap from this past week. We talked about the visit recap, a couple of the great performers that were there, Logan Saldate, Austin Alexander. If you didn't hear that part of the podcast, make sure to go back and listen after I hit the end button here. Want to thank you all, though, again, so much. Make sure before you leave today, hit that like button, notification bell, subscribe to the podcast, boards@irishbreakdown.com for all your recent Notre Dame recruiting and team intel. Brian Driscoll and Vincent Darrow will be back tonight with Upon Further Review. I will be back tomorrow with Brian Driscoll as we now turn the page to North Carolina State and Notre Dame's battle against them on Saturday. So hit that like button. We'll see you all again. We'll see you all next time again on the Irish Breakdown podcast.